Fort Knox, Kentucky, June 21st, 1950. The summer heat radiated off the dusty training grounds in waves that distorted the horizon. Captain James Mitchell stood atop the hill overlooking the tank range, his weathered face unmoving as he watched the young crews fumble through their exercises. 25 years of military service had etched permanent lines around his eyes, not from age alone, but from squinting through periscopes into enemy territory, from sleepless nights in the cramped confines of Sherman tanks, and from burying too many young men who never made it home. Another failure of imagination, Mitchell muttered to himself as the newest M26 Pershing crew struggled with their target acquisition. The tank's massive 90-millimeter gun elevated too slowly, missing the opportunity for a clean shot on a moving target. They'd have been dead if this were real combat. Mitchell made a mental note to address this during the afternoon debrief. Only 3 weeks remained before his retirement, but he wouldn't ease up on these boys. Their lives might depend on what they learned here. Sergeant Frank Peterson approached from behind, his boots crunching on the gravel. At 42, Peterson was one of the few men under Mitchell's command who understood what real tank warfare felt like. They'd served together since North Africa in '42. "Coffee, sir, black as the inside of a tank at midnight." Mitchell accepted the steaming tin cup without turning. "What do you see down there, Frank?" Peterson squinted at the training exercise. The Pershing had finally managed to hit its target, but only after 3 missed shots. "I see boys playing at war, Cap. They hit the target eventually, but the enemy won't give them 3 chances," Mitchell finished the thought. "They're following the book perfectly. That's the problem." "Books aren't written by tankers," Peterson said with a knowing grin. Mitchell took a sip of the bitter coffee. Not by live ones, anyway. Both men understood the truth that couldn't be taught in classrooms or technical manuals. Tank warfare wasn't about perfect specifications or theoretical ballistics. It was about instinct, about knowing when to break the rules, about hearing the slight change in an engine's pitch that told you exactly which enemy tank was approaching, even before you saw it. Mitchell had what the old tankers called the golden ear. He could identify any armored vehicle by sound alone. German Panzer IVs had a distinctive high-pitched whine when their turrets rotated. The massive Tiger tanks announced themselves with a low, methodical rumble that you felt in your bones before your ears registered it. This wasn't knowledge that could be passed down in a manual. It came from years of experience, from listening for your life. The radio on Peterson's belt crackled to life. "Captain Mitchell to HQ immediately. Repeat. Captain Mitchell to headquarters immediately." Mitchell handed his half-finished coffee back to Peterson. "Probably another complaint from the Pentagon boys about our fuel consumption. God forbid we let these kids practice with real ammo." "Want me to finish up here, sir?" "Run them through the night maneuvers drill. I want them identifying targets by sound before they retire to the barracks, and no headlights. War doesn't stop when the sun sets." Mitchell's Jeep kicked up dust as he navigated the winding roads of Fort Knox. 25 years of service, 17 confirmed tank kills in Europe. He'd been there when American armor finally met its match against German Panthers and Tigers. He'd watched good men die because their equipment and training weren't up to the task. Those lessons had been paid for in blood. Yet here they were, a new generation of commanders eager to forget and start fresh with their charts and statistics. Colonel Walter Reed was waiting outside headquarters, his face grim beneath his immaculately maintained campaign hat. Reed had been a rear echelon officer during the big one, never saw frontline combat, but he respected those who had, which made him tolerable in Mitchell's book. "They're waiting for you inside, Jim," Reed said, addressing Mitchell by his first name, a privilege earned through years of mutual respect. "Something big's happening. We've got visitors from Washington." Mitchell nodded, straightening his uniform out of habit. "Any idea what this is about?" "North Korea crossed the 38th parallel yesterday. They're pouring into South Korea with everything they've got, including tanks, Russian-made T-34s. Mitchell felt his stomach tighten. He knew the T-34, had studied reports of their devastating effectiveness against German forces on the Eastern Front. Sloped armor, wide tracks for excellent mobility in rough terrain, a capable 85mm gun. Not the most technologically advanced tank, but rugged, reliable, and deadly in the hands of trained crews. "How many?" Mitchell asked. "Initial reports suggest at least 200, maybe more. 200 tanks against the lightly armed South Korean forces. It would be a slaughter." The headquarters building hummed with unusual activity as Mitchell entered. Junior officers rushed through hallways carrying armfuls of files. Phones rang unanswered. At the far end of the main corridor, Mitchell spotted two men in civilian suits standing outside the commander's office. Their government-issue haircuts and rigid postures betraying their military backgrounds despite the civilian clothing. Inside the commander's office, Brigadier General Maxwell stood behind his desk, leaning over a map of the Korean peninsula. Beside him stood an officer Mitchell didn't recognize, a full-bird colonel with a chest full of ribbons, but no tank combat badges visible among them. "Captain Mitchell reporting as ordered, sir," Mitchell announced, standing at attention. General Maxwell looked up, relief visible on his face. "At ease, Captain. This is Colonel Harrison from the Pentagon. He's here about the situation in Korea." Colonel Harrison turned to face Mitchell, assessing him with cold blue eyes. "Captain Mitchell, your reputation precedes you. I understand you're due to retire in 3 weeks." "Yes, sir, after 25 years. I'm afraid retirement will have to wait, Captain. The President has authorized a police action to counter North Korean aggression. We're mobilizing everything we can, including your tank expertise." Mitchell kept his face neutral. "I serve at the pleasure of the President, sir." "Good." Harrison handed Mitchell a folder stamped with "Top Secret" in bold red letters. "Familiarize yourself with this intelligence assessment. The North Koreans have deployed Soviet T-34-85 tanks across the border. Our initial engagements have not gone well. South Korean forces are in full retreat." Mitchell scanned the intelligence report quickly, his experienced eyes picking out the important details. "Sir, this assessment claims the T-34s will be vulnerable to air attack and can be neutralized before engaging our ground forces." Harrison nodded confidently. "That's correct. Our air superiority will be the deciding factor. The North Korean armor will be decimated from above before they reach our defensive positions." Mitchell fought to keep his expression neutral. The confidence bordered on arrogance, reminding him of early war assessments about German armor. "With respect, Colonel, I've reviewed combat data from the Eastern Front. The T-34 is remarkably resilient against air attack. Its sloped armor deflects all but direct hits, and its wide tracks allow for rapid dispersal and concealment." Harrison's jaw tightened. "Captain, this assessment comes directly from Air Force intelligence and the Pentagon's best analysts. Are you suggesting they're wrong?" "I'm suggesting they haven't faced T-34s in combat, sir." Mitchell placed his finger on the map, tracing the likely route of advance. "The terrain here favors armor. Plenty of cover, limited fields of fire for aircraft. Unless our pilots get lucky, a significant number of those tanks will make contact with our ground forces." General Maxwell cleared his throat. "This is why we need you, Mitchell. Your experience with armored warfare is unmatched. We're putting together a special unit, officially the 118th Tank Battalion. Unofficially," Harrison added with barely disguised disdain, "they're calling it the Dinosaur Battalion." Mitchell raised an eyebrow. "Sir?" General Maxwell looked uncomfortable. "We're recalling experienced tank commanders and crews from World War II. Men who faced superior enemy armor before and survived. Most are in their late 30s and 40s now. Old men, by military standards," Harrison added. "But desperate times call for desperate measures. We need every tank commander we can get, even the vintage ones." Mitchell understood immediately. This was to be a battalion of cast-offs, men considered too old for frontline combat but too valuable to ignore completely in this crisis. It was both an opportunity and an insult. "You'll be deployed to Korea within the week," Harrison continued. "Your mission will be to buy time until more modern units can arrive. Hold defensive positions, protect supply lines, train South Korean tank crews. Rear echelon duties primarily." Mitchell studied the intelligence report again, focusing on the combat performance section. "These numbers don't add up, sir. You're estimating a 90% destruction rate of T-34s from air power alone. That's wildly optimistic." Harrison's face reddened. "Those figures come directly from Air Force Command, Captain. They've assured you of something no Air Force in history has ever accomplished," Mitchell interrupted, knowing he was overstepping, but unable to let it pass. "The Luftwaffe couldn't achieve those numbers against T-34s even at the height of their power. What makes us think we can?" General Maxwell intervened before Harrison could respond. "That's precisely why we need men like you, Mitchell. Men who understand the reality of tank warfare beyond the numbers on paper. If those T-34s do break through, you'll be our last line of defense." Mitchell closed the folder. "I'll need to select my own crews, men I know and trust." "Within reason," Harrison said quickly. Many of your former subordinates are long since discharged, but we've compiled a list of available tank veterans still on active duty or in the reserves. And I'll need the new M26 Pershing tanks, not the older Shermans. Against T-34 85s, we'll need the 90mm gun. Harrison exchanged glances with General Maxwell. That may be difficult. The newer M46 Pattons are prioritized for the regular armored divisions. Your unit might have to make do with what's available. Which means outdated equipment for outdated men, Mitchell said flatly. Sir, your experience is supposed to compensate for equipment shortfalls, Captain, Harrison replied coldly, unless you feel you're not up to the task. Mitchell stood straighter, feeling every one of his 46 years but refusing to show weakness. I've never failed to complete a mission, Colonel. I don't intend to start now. Good, General Maxwell said, clearly relieved to end the tension. You have 3 days to assemble your core team here at Fort Knox. The rest of the battalion will meet you in Japan for final preparations before deploying to Korea. He extended his hand. Good luck, Captain Mitchell. The lives of a lot of young men may depend on what you and your dinosaurs can accomplish. Mitchell saluted smartly, then turned to leave. As he reached the door, Harrison called after him. One more thing, Captain. You'll be integrating some younger officers into your command structure. West Point graduates with the latest tactical training. They'll bring modern perspective to balance your experience. Mitchell didn't bother turning around. As long as they're willing to learn, Colonel, we'll get along fine. They're not being sent to learn from you, Captain, Harrison replied. They're being sent to ensure your methods don't get our tanks and men needlessly destroyed. The days of improvised tank tactics are over. Modern warfare is about precision, technology, and adherence to proven doctrine. Mitchell finally turned, meeting Harrison's gaze directly. With respect, Colonel, tanks don't fight wars. Men do, and men need more than doctrine when the shells start flying. But I'm sure we'll all learn that lesson together soon enough. 3 days was barely enough time. Mitchell had spent every waking hour on the phone and in meetings, pulling strings and calling in favors to assemble the core of his battalion. The list Harrison had provided was nearly worthless, filled with tank veterans who'd either been out of active service too long or had never seen actual combat against enemy armor. Sergeant Peterson was his first recruit, followed by Master Sergeant William Wild Bill Jenkins, who'd commanded a Sherman in the 2nd Armored Division during the Battle of the Bulge. Technical Sergeant Henry Wilson joined next, a mechanical genius who could coax extra horsepower from any engine and fix track damage under fire. Together, they formed the nucleus of what Mitchell hoped would become an effective fighting unit. Men whose combined experience in armored warfare totaled nearly a century. But Harrison had been true to his word about integrating younger officers. On the morning of their departure, Mitchell found himself facing one such addition to his command. First Lieutenant Robert Lawson stood in Mitchell's temporary office, his uniform crisp and perfect, his posture academy straight. At 24, Lawson represented everything the new Army valued: youth, education, and unwavering belief in technology and procedures. His record showed top marks at West Point and high performance in tank warfare simulations, but no combat experience whatsoever. Lieutenant Lawson reporting for duty, sir. The young man's salute was textbook perfect. Mitchell returned the salute with considerably less formality. At ease, Lieutenant. I understand you'll be serving as my executive officer. Yes, sir. I've been fully briefed on our mission parameters and the battalion's composition. Lawson's voice carried the unmistakable accent of old money and private schools. I must say, it's an honor to serve with a distinguished veteran such as yourself. The words were right, but Mitchell detected the faintest hint of condescension beneath them. Have you ever been inside a tank in combat, Lieutenant? Not in actual combat, sir, no, but I've logged over 500 hours in training exercises and simulators. I graduated top of my class in armored warfare tactics. Mitchell nodded. Simulators, very good. Tell me, Lieutenant, in these simulators, did they replicate the smell inside a tank after 12 hours of combat? The way the air becomes thick with cordite and sweat? Did they teach you how to clear a jammed 90mm shell while enemy fire is bouncing off your armor? Lawson's perfect posture stiffened further. No, sir, but modern training methods can't teach you everything, Mitchell finished for him. Don't worry, you'll learn the rest when it counts. He gestured to a chair. Sit down, let's talk about your understanding of the T-34. Lawson sat reluctantly, clearly uncomfortable with the informal approach. The T-34-85 is a medium tank of Soviet design, weighing approximately 32 tons, armed with an 85mm main gun. Its sloped armor provides effective protection against most anti-tank weapons, though intelligence reports indicate our air power will neutralize the majority before they reach our positions. Mitchell leaned back in his chair. And you believe that assessment? It comes directly from Pentagon intelligence, sir. I have no reason to doubt it. I see. Mitchell opened his desk drawer and removed a worn leather notebook. This is my combat diary from 1944 and 45. I recorded every tank engagement I participated in or witnessed. Results, conditions, what worked and what didn't. He slid it across the desk. I'd like you to read it before we reach Korea. Lawson made no move to take the notebook. With all due respect, Captain, warfare has evolved significantly since 1945. The tactics and observations from World War II may not be applicable to modern combat scenarios. Tanks haven't evolved as much as you might think, Lieutenant. Neither have the men who operate them. Mitchell pushed the notebook closer. Enemy tanks are still operated by human beings with the same strengths and weaknesses they have always had. Understanding those is just as important as knowing the technical specifications. The T-34s we'll be facing are operated by North Koreans with minimal training and experience, Lawson countered. According to our intelligence, they won't reach us at all, Mitchell interrupted. But you and I are going to plan as if they do, because that's what good officers do. They prepare for when intelligence is wrong. Lawson's jaw tightened. Yes, sir. Mitchell studied the young lieutenant for a moment. There was intelligence behind the arrogance, and perhaps the makings of a good officer if experience didn't come at too high a price. You've been assigned to my command for a reason, Lieutenant. I assume Colonel Harrison has given you additional instructions regarding my command style. The slight reddening of Lawson's face confirmed Mitchell's suspicion. I thought so. Let me save you some trouble. I don't follow the manual when the manual will get my men killed. I don't trust intelligence reports that contradict common sense, and I value experience over theory every time. Mitchell leaned forward. That said, I'm not opposed to new ideas when they make sense. Prove to me your ideas work, and I'll listen. Is that why they call your unit the Dinosaur Battalion, sir? Because you refuse to adapt to modern warfare? The question might have angered another commander, but Mitchell had been expecting it. They call us dinosaurs because we're supposedly extinct, Lieutenant. Relics of another era. But here's something to consider. Dinosaurs ruled the earth for millions of years because they were perfectly adapted to their environment. It took a cataclysm to wipe them out. He stood up. Let's hope we don't face a cataclysm in Korea. The flight to Japan was long and uncomfortable in the military transport. Mitchell spent most of it reviewing personnel files and the limited intelligence available on North Korean tank deployments. Lawson sat nearby, ostentatiously studying the official field manual for armored combat operations, occasionally giving Mitchell sidelong glances that suggested he found the captain's methods suspect. The rest of Mitchell's core team spread throughout the aircraft. Sergeant Peterson slept soundly, a skill he'd perfected during the war. Technical Sergeant Wilson had somehow befriended the flight crew and was in the cockpit, probably discussing engine specifications. Master Sergeant Jenkins was holding court with some of the younger tank crews, telling war stories that grew more outlandish with each retelling. Mitchell smiled to himself. Jenkins' stories served a purpose beyond entertainment. They were building camaraderie and subtly introducing combat wisdom disguised as tall tales. The younger tankers would remember those stories when the shooting started, and that might save their lives. Japan was chaos when they arrived. The rapid escalation of the Korean conflict had transformed the peaceful occupation into a massive staging area for what was quickly becoming a major military operation. Mitchell and his men were given 48 hours to integrate with the rest of their hastily assembled battalion before deploying to Korea. The remaining personnel of the 118th consisted of a mix of World War II veterans, pulled from various duties across the Pacific, and younger crews with limited experience. Mitchell was dismayed to discover that instead of the M26 Pershing tanks he'd requested, they were being issued a mix of M4A3 E8 EZ-8 Shermans and only a handful of the newer Pershings. This is unacceptable, Mitchell told the supply officer, a harried major trying to manage equipment distribution for dozens of units simultaneously. The standard 76mm gun on the Sherman can't reliably penetrate the frontal armor of a T-34-85 except at dangerously close ranges. The major shrugged helplessly. I understand, Captain, but there's nothing I can do. The newest tanks are going to the 1st Cavalry and 24th Infantry Divisions. Your unit is classified as support, not frontline combat. Support? Is that what they're calling cannon fodder these days? Mitchell kept his voice level despite his frustration. Who made that classification? It came directly from Tokyo HQ, sir, Colonel Harrison's recommendation. Of course it had. Harrison had effectively hamstrung Mitchell's battalion before they'd even reached Korea. With inferior equipment and a secondary role, they'd have little opportunity to demonstrate the value of their experience. Mitchell found Lawson watching him from across the supply depot. Problem with our equipment allocation, sir? Just Pentagon politics, Lieutenant. Nothing new. Mitchell gestured for Lawson to follow him outside, away from the busy depot. Once they were alone, he continued, "We're being set up to fail, Lawson. Given inadequate equipment in a support role because Harrison and his crowd don't believe experience matters as much as their precious new doctrines." Lawson frowned. "That's a serious accusation, sir. Colonel Harrison is a respected strategic planner who's never faced enemy armor in combat," Mitchell countered. "Look, I don't expect you to take my word for it, but I want you to start thinking critically about the situation we're heading into. Those intelligence reports claiming 90% of enemy tanks will be destroyed by air power? I've seen similar reports before, in North Africa, in Italy, in France. They're never accurate. So what are you suggesting, sir, that we disobey our orders?" Mitchell shook his head. "No, we follow orders, but we prepare for what's really coming, not what the reports claim is coming. I'm going to need every officer in this battalion thinking on their feet, including you." For the first time, Lawson seemed to consider Mitchell's words seriously. "What do you think is really coming, sir?" "T-34s, lots of them, in terrain where air support will be limited and visibility poor. We'll be outgunned and outnumbered." Mitchell looked directly into the younger man's eyes. "And a lot of good men will die unless we're smarter and better prepared than the enemy. But the tactical advantage isn't always determined by who has the better equipment or the newer doctrine," Mitchell interrupted. "It's determined by who can adapt faster when everything goes to hell. That's what experience gives you, Lieutenant. The ability to recognize when the plan isn't working and the confidence to try something else before it's too late." Lawson didn't respond immediately, his expression thoughtful. Finally, he said, "I'll keep an open mind, sir." It wasn't enthusiastic support, but it was a start. "That's all I ask, Lieutenant. Now let's go see what we can do to make these Shermans more combat effective before we ship out." The next day brought another unwelcome surprise. Colonel Harrison himself arrived at their staging area, accompanied by a team of staff officers. He summoned Mitchell to a briefing in the makeshift headquarters. "Captain Mitchell, good to see you're getting your unit organized," Harrison said without preamble. "I've brought updated intelligence and mission parameters." Mitchell nodded stiffly, noting the presence of Lieutenant Lawson among the assembled officers. The young man must have been summoned separately. Harrison activated a slide projector, displaying a map of the Korean peninsula with troop movements marked in different colors. "The situation has deteriorated more rapidly than anticipated. North Korean forces have pushed south of Seoul. Their tank units have proven more effective than initially estimated." "More effective than air power could handle?" Mitchell asked, unable to keep the edge from his voice. Harrison's eyes narrowed. "Weather conditions have limited air operations, but that's temporary. Once we establish air superiority, the enemy armor threat will be neutralized as predicted." Mitchell said nothing, but exchanged glances with Sergeant Peterson, who stood near the back of the room. They'd heard similar assurances before. "Your battalion will deploy to this region," Harrison continued, indicating an area south of Seoul. "You'll provide tank support for elements of the 24th Infantry Division, which is moving to establish blocking positions along these routes." He traced several roads leading south. "Your primary mission is defensive. Hold these positions, prevent enemy armor from breaking through to threaten our supply lines." Mitchell studied the map carefully. The terrain was challenging, hilly with narrow valleys that channeled movement along predictable routes. Good defensive ground if properly used. "What intelligence do we have on enemy tank strength in this sector?" Harrison changed slides, showing a table of estimated North Korean forces. "Approximately 40 to 50 T-34s operating in your area of responsibility. But as I've said, air power will reduce those numbers significantly before they reach your positions." Mitchell noticed Lawson shifting uncomfortably at this assertion. Perhaps the lieutenant was beginning to develop some healthy skepticism. "What about anti-tank weapons for our infantry support?" Mitchell asked. The 24th will need more than bazookas to stop T-34s reliably. They'll be equipped according to standard doctrine, Harrison replied dismissively. Your job is to handle enemy armor, Captain, not critique infantry equipment allocation. My job is to keep my men alive while completing our mission, Mitchell countered. That becomes more difficult when the units we're supporting lack adequate anti-tank capability. Harrison's expression hardened. Your job, Captain Mitchell, is to follow orders and implement approved doctrine, not to improvise or question strategic decisions made by those with a broader view of the conflict. The room fell silent. Even Harrison's staff officers looked uncomfortable with the direct rebuke. Mitchell took a deep breath. Of course, sir, we'll deploy as ordered and accomplish our mission with the resources provided. See that you do. Harrison shut off the projector. You ship out at 0600 tomorrow. I expect daily situation reports once you're in position. Any deviation from approved tactics must be cleared through command first. Is that understood? Perfectly, sir. Mitchell kept his face expressionless, though his mind was already working through contingency plans. Harrison might dictate orders from the safety of headquarters, but once the shooting started, Mitchell would do whatever was necessary to protect his men and accomplish the mission. As the briefing concluded, Mitchell found himself standing next to Lawson. The lieutenant's usual confidence seemed diminished. Something on your mind, Lieutenant? Mitchell asked quietly. Lawson hesitated. The intelligence estimates, sir, 40 to 50 T-34s in our sector alone. If air power doesn't neutralize them as projected, then we'll be facing superior numbers with inferior equipment. Mitchell finished for him. Welcome to war, Lieutenant. It's rarely fair. The manual doesn't adequately address these conditions, Lawson admitted, looking troubled. Mitchell allowed himself a small smile. That's why they send men to war, Lieutenant, not manuals. Come with me. We need to brief our tank commanders on what to really expect once we cross into Korea. The pre-deployment briefing Mitchell held for his tank commanders was unlike anything Lawson had experienced at West Point. Instead of focusing on formal doctrine and operational parameters, Mitchell gathered his men around a makeshift sand table model of their assigned territory. Forget what you've been told about air support, Mitchell began bluntly. Plan as if it won't be there when you need it. The T-34-85 has frontal armor that can withstand hits from our 76mm guns, except at very close range or perfect angles. Their 85mm gun can penetrate our armor at most combat ranges. A murmur ran through the assembled men. Many of the younger tankers looked concerned, while the veterans nodded grimly. So how do we fight them, sir? Asked a young sergeant who commanded one of the Sherman tanks. We fight smarter, Mitchell replied. The T-34 has significant weaknesses. Poor visibility for the crew. Limited gun depression that makes it difficult for them to engage targets from high ground. Their gun sights and fire control systems are crude by our standards. He pointed to different features on the sand table. We'll use the terrain to our advantage. Position our tanks hull down behind ridge lines where the T-34s can't depress their guns enough to hit us. Use our superior optics to spot them before they spot us. And most importantly, we'll engage from the flanks whenever possible, where their armor is thinner. Sergeant Peterson stepped forward. We'll also be implementing buddy tactics. No tank operates alone. You'll work in pairs at minimum, covering each other's movements and blind spots. Mitchell noticed Lawson watching intently, his expression thoughtful. The lieutenant was learning, perhaps more quickly than Mitchell had expected. One more thing, Mitchell continued. The T-34 has a distinctive engine sound. Once you've heard it, you'll never forget it. It's a deeper, more guttural rumble than our Shermans or Pershings. Learning to identify it could give you precious seconds of warning before visual contact. Jenkins spoke up from the back. Like the captain says, you gotta listen. Back in the Ardennes, I heard a king tiger before I saw it. Saved my whole crew because we were able to back into cover before it rounded the bend. Mitchell nodded. We'll conduct sound recognition drills tonight using recordings. It's not perfect, but it's better than nothing. He looked around at the faces of his men, a mix of hardened veterans and untested youth. Questions? A hand went up from one of the newer tank commanders. Sir, what about the intelligence reports saying most enemy tanks will be destroyed by airstrikes? Mitchell exchanged glances with Peterson before answering. Plan for the worst, hope for the best. If those reports are accurate, we'll have an easy time. If not, he let the implications hang in the air. If not, Sergeant Peterson finished, then what you learn here might save your lives. After the briefing, Mitchell found Lawson waiting for him outside the tent. The young lieutenant's expression was serious. Captain, may I speak with you privately? Mitchell nodded, and they walked away from the busy encampment toward the perimeter. The evening air was cool, a welcome relief from the day's heat. Your briefing contradicted several key points from Colonel Harrison's intelligence assessment, Lawson said once they were alone. It did, Mitchell agreed calmly. That borders on insubordination. Only if I'm wrong, Lieutenant. If I'm right, it's called keeping our men alive. Lawson frowned. But if every commander disregarded intelligence and orders based on personal judgment, then we might win more battles and lose fewer men, Mitchell interrupted. Look, Lawson, I understand the chain of command. I respect it. But I've seen firsthand what happens when commanders blindly follow flawed intelligence and rigid doctrine. He paused, remembering faces of men long dead. In 1943, I watched an entire tank company get wiped out because their commander followed orders to advance across open ground against concealed German 88s. By the book, but the book was wrong for the situation. This isn't 1943, Lawson insisted. Our intelligence capabilities have advanced significantly. Mitchell turned to face the younger man directly. Have they? Then why are our forces being pushed back across Korea right now? Why have the North Koreans advanced faster and farther than our intelligence predicted? Why have their T-34s proven more effective than anticipated? Lawson had no immediate answer. I'm not asking you to disregard orders, Lieutenant. I'm asking you to think critically, to prepare for realities, not projections. Mitchell softened his tone. The men under your command will look to you when everything goes to hell. Their lives will depend on your judgment, not on what some manual says should happen in an ideal scenario. I understand that, sir, Lawson said, his voice less certain than usual. But there has to be a balance between experience and modern analytical approaches. Mitchell nodded. There does. And finding that balance might be the most valuable lesson you learn in Korea. He clasped the lieutenant's shoulder. Get some rest. Tomorrow we cross into a war zone, and none of us knows exactly what we'll find there. As Lawson walked away, Mitchell remained at the perimeter, looking out at the darkening landscape. 25 years of service, and here he was, about to enter another war. Not the retirement he'd planned, but perhaps the mission he had been preparing for his entire career. From behind him came the unmistakable sound of Sergeant Peterson's approach. The men are ready, Cap, Peterson said, coming to stand beside him. As ready as they can be, anyway. And you, Frank? Ready for one more dance? Peterson chuckled. Not sure my knees are up for dancing anymore, but I can still shoot straight. And I'd rather be watching your back than sitting at home wondering how you're managing without me. Mitchell smiled grimly. Harrison's setting us up to fail, you know. Limited resources, secondary objectives, outdated equipment. He wants to prove that experience doesn't matter as much as his precious new doctrines. Then we'll just have to prove him wrong, won't we? Peterson lit a cigarette, cupping his hands around the flame. Wouldn't be the first time old dogs taught the young pups a few tricks. No, it wouldn't. Mitchell watched as lights began to appear in the encampment behind them, tankers preparing for tomorrow's deployment. Many wouldn't return. That was the cold reality of war. But Mitchell was determined to bring back as many as possible. Harrison's doctrines be damned. Get some sleep, Frank. Tomorrow we find out what these North Korean tank crews are really made of. And they find out what we're made of, Peterson replied with grim satisfaction. Poor bastards won't know what hit them. As darkness fell completely, Mitchell remained alone with his thoughts, mentally preparing for what lay ahead. Despite the years, despite the aches in his joints and the gray at his temples, he felt the familiar, calm certainty that came before combat. The dinosaurs were going to war one last time. And whatever Colonel Harrison and his analysts believed, Mitchell knew the reality they would face. Steel against steel, crew against crew, with victory going to those who could adapt fastest when theory collided with bloody reality. That had always been the truth of tank warfare. It always would be. The rain fell in sheets across the Korean landscape, turning roads into muddy quagmires and reducing visibility to mere yards. Captain Mitchell stood in the command half-track, rainwater streaming from his helmet as he surveyed the defensive positions his tanks had established along the ridgeline. 6 days in country, and already the situation had deteriorated far beyond the optimistic projections from headquarters. North Korean forces had smashed through the forward positions of the 24th Infantry Division, sending American troops retreating in disarray. Reports indicated that enemy T-34s had spearheaded the assault, breaking through with minimal losses despite airstrikes. Exactly as Mitchell had feared, and exactly contrary to Harrison's confident predictions. Radio check all units, Mitchell called into the handset. Confirm positions and status. One by one, his tank commanders reported in. The 118th was deploying 8 Shermans and 4 Pershings along a 3-mile front, covering a valley approach that intelligence now indicated would be the likely route for a major North Korean advance. Their mission had shifted from support to critical defense almost overnight, as frontline units fell back in disorder. Thunder 6, this is Thunder 3, Pershing in position at Checkpoint Charlie. Visibility limited, nothing moving yet. Lieutenant Lawson's voice crackled through the radio, remarkably steady despite the circumstances. Mitchell had assigned Lawson one of the precious few Pershings, placing him at a crucial junction where a side valley intersected their main defensive line. It was a test of sorts, giving the young officer significant responsibility while keeping him within supporting distance of more experienced crews. Copy. Thunder 3. Maintain position and report any contacts immediately. Mitchell turned to Sergeant Peterson, who stood beside him in the half-track. What do you think, Frank? Will they push through this weather or wait for better conditions? Peterson squinted into the rain. They'll come. The weather hampers our air support more than it hampers their advance. They'd be fools not to exploit that. Mitchell nodded in agreement. My thoughts exactly. Radio command, tell them we're expecting contact within the hour and request artillery support to be ready on these coordinates. He handed Peterson a marked map. As Peterson relayed the message, a radio operator approached the half-track. Urgent message from HQ, sir. Mitchell took the written dispatch, reading it quickly, his expression darkening. They're pulling our artillery support, redirecting it to cover the retreat of the 24th's headquarters element. Leaving us hanging in the wind, Peterson observed grimly. Not just us. There's a battalion of infantry dug in about a mile behind our position. No anti-tank weapons heavier than bazookas. Mitchell crumpled the dispatch. If we don't stop those T-34s here, those boys are going to get slaughtered. Before Peterson could respond, another radio call came through, this one from their forward observation post. Thunder 6, this is Scout 1. Multiple engine sounds approaching from the north. Heavy tracked vehicles, moving at speed. Mitchell felt the familiar tightening in his gut. The body's natural response to imminent danger honed by years of combat. Estimated number in each. And can't be sure in this range, sir, but I'd say at least company strength. 15, maybe 20 vehicles. ETA your position 10 minutes if they maintain current speed. 20 tanks against their 12, with no artillery support and limited visibility. The odds were poor, but Mitchell had faced worse. All units, this is Thunder 6. Enemy armor approaching from the north. Estimated company strength, ETA 10 minutes. Hold positions. Maintain radio discipline. Fire on my command only. He switched to the private channel. Thunder 3, acknowledge. Thunder 3 copies, Lawson replied. Remember what we discussed about T-34 vulnerabilities. They'll have limited visibility in this rain, just like us, but their optics are inferior to begin with. Use that to our advantage. Understood, sir. We're ready. Mitchell hoped that was true. The next hour would tell if his crash course in real-world tank warfare had prepared Lawson and the other inexperienced crews for what was coming. 8 minutes later, Mitchell heard it. Even through the drumming rain, the distinctive growl of T-34 engines carried up the valley. His golden ear hadn't failed him. They were coming and in force. Contact imminent, he radioed to his units. Remember your training. Aim for the flanks when possible. Tracks if you don't have a clean shot. Make every round count. Through the rain, dark shapes began to materialize on the valley floor. T-34 85s, moving in a loose wedge formation. Commander's hatches buttoned up against the weather. Mitchell counted 15, then 18, then lost count as more appeared from the curtain of rain. Too many. Far more than intelligence had indicated should be in this sector. Thunder 6 to all units. Hold fire until they reach the minefield. Their hasty preparations had included laying mines across the valley floor. Not enough to stop the advance, but hopefully sufficient to disrupt it. Force the T-34s to bunch up or present their vulnerable sides as they maneuvered around disabled vehicles. The lead T-34 hit the first mine with a muffled explosion that was audible even over the rain. A track separated from its sprocket, sending the tank into an uncontrolled pivot. 2 more explosions followed in quick succession as other tanks triggered mines. Fire at will, Mitchell ordered. The ridgeline erupted as the American tanks opened fire. Muzzle flashes briefly illuminated the rainy landscape, followed by the distinctive crack of high-velocity shells. Mitchell watched through binoculars as the first rounds found their marks. A T-34 erupted in flames as a 90mm shell from one of the Pershings penetrated its turret. Another lost its track to a well-placed shot. But the North Koreans responded quickly. Their tank commanders had been well trained by Soviet advisors. Instead of panicking, they deployed into firing positions, their own guns seeking out the American tanks partially concealed on the ridge. Thunder 2, target moving left to right, range 800 yards. Mitchell directed one of his veteran Sherman commanders. Thunder 2, firing now. The Sherman's 76mm gun barked, and a T-34 in the valley below staggered as the round struck its flank. Not a killing blow, but enough to damage it. The enemy returned fire, shells whistling overhead or impacting the ridgeline. Most fell short or wide, but their sheer volume was concerning. The North Koreans were employing Soviet tactics, overwhelming firepower to compensate for limited accuracy. "They're trying to flank our eastern position," Peterson warned, pointing to movement at the far end of the valley. Mitchell grabbed the radio. "Thunder 3, be advised. Enemy armor attempting to move up the side valley toward your position. At least 3 T-34s. "Thunder 3 copies," Lawson acknowledged, his voice tight but controlled. "We have visual." Mitchell turned his attention back to the main battle. Despite the successful ambush, the situation was deteriorating rapidly. The North Korean force was simply too large to stop completely with their limited resources. Several T-34s had already pushed through the minefield and were advancing up the slope toward their positions. "Thunder 4 and 5, fall back to secondary positions." Mitchell ordered two of his Shermans that were most exposed. "Thunder 1 and 6, provide covering fire." As his units executed the maneuver, an urgent call came over the radio. "Thunder 6, this is Thunder 3. We are engaged with multiple T-34s at close range, requesting immediate support." The sound of intense gunfire punctuated Lawson's transmission. Mitchell made an instant decision. "Thunder 7 and 8, break off and reinforce Thunder 3's position immediately. Frank with me." Mitchell jumped down from the half-track into the mud, running toward his personal tank, a Pershing designated Thunder 6. Peterson was right behind him as they reached the idling vehicle and climbed aboard. The rest of the crew, gunner, loader, and driver, were already at their stations. "Driver, move out! East slope trail, maximum speed," Mitchell ordered as he settled into the commander's position and secured his helmet. "Gunner, load armor piercing and stand by." The Pershing lurched forward, its powerful engine roaring as it navigated the narrow trail that ran behind the ridgeline toward Lawson's position. Despite the poor conditions, the driver maintained a reckless pace, knowing that minutes could mean the difference between life and death for their comrades. As they approached the side valley, the sounds of combat grew louder. Multiple guns firing, the crash of shells impacting, the grinding of tank treads on rocky ground. Mitchell popped his head out of the turret despite the rain, needing to see the situation clearly. What he saw made his blood run cold. Lawson's Pershing was surrounded by 3 T-34s at point-blank range, conducting what tankers called a circle of death, continuously moving around their target to prevent effective return fire. The Pershing's turret was traversing desperately, trying to bring its gun to bear, but the T-34s maintained perfect positioning, staying just outside its firing arc. "Driver, hard left, down the slope. Gunner, target right, most T-34, fire when ready." Mitchell's Pershing broke from the tree line and plunged down the slope toward the melee. The gunner acquired the nearest T-34 and fired in one smooth motion. At such close range, the 90mm shell couldn't miss. It struck the T-34's turret ring, separating the turret from the hull in a catastrophic explosion. The sudden attack broke the coordinated movement of the remaining T-34s. One swung its turret toward this new threat, exposing its flank to Lawson's Pershing. The lieutenant didn't waste the opportunity. His tank's 90mm gun fired, the shell penetrating the T-34's thinner side armor and igniting its ammunition in a secondary explosion that sent its turret flying 30 feet into the air. The third T-34 began to reverse, attempting to escape now that the odds had turned against it. But two more Shermans crested the ridge, Thunder 7 and 8 arriving as ordered, and added their firepower to the engagement. Caught in a crossfire, the T-34 didn't last 10 seconds before multiple hits left it a burning wreck. Mitchell's Pershing ground to a halt beside Lawson's. The young lieutenant's tank showed signs of multiple hits, but had survived thanks to its superior armor. Mitchell popped his hatch and signaled to Lawson, who emerged from his own turret looking shaken but determined. "Good shooting, Lieutenant," Mitchell called over the rain and the crackling of burning tanks. "How's your crew?" All intact, sir, Lawson shouted back. They tried to catch us in crossfire but couldn't penetrate our frontal armor. You held your position well. Mitchell's praise was genuine. Despite his inexperience, Lawson had maintained discipline under extreme pressure. Form up with Thunder 7 and 8. We need to return to the main line. The battle's not over yet. As if to emphasize his point, the ground shook with multiple explosions from the direction they had come. The main North Korean force was still pressing the attack against their primary defensive line. Sir, Lawson hesitated. There were more T-34s following these three, at least a full platoon. They turned north toward the Valley Pass where the infantry battalion is positioned. Mitchell felt his stomach sink. Just as he'd feared, the North Koreans were attempting to bypass their tank screen to attack the vulnerable infantry behind them. With no effective anti-tank weapons, that battalion would be massacred. Change of plans, Mitchell decided immediately. All units here, form on me. We're going to pursue that platoon before they reach our infantry. Thunder 2, do you copy? The radio crackled with a response from his second-in-command on the main line. Thunder 2 copies. We're heavily engaged but holding for now. Can you manage without reinforcement for 30 minutes? There was a pause before the reply came. Affirmative, Thunder 6, but not much longer than that. They're pressing hard. Understood. We'll be back as soon as we neutralize the flanking force. Thunder 6 out. Mitchell turned to the assembled tanks. Follow me, maximum safe speed. Those boys up ahead are counting on us. The 4 tanks moved out in column formation, taking a narrow logging trail that paralleled the route the North Korean tanks had followed. The rain continued unabated, reducing visibility and turning the trail into a muddy morass that challenged even the powerful engines and wide tracks of the American tanks. After 10 minutes of grueling progress, they emerged onto a ridgeline overlooking a small valley. Below them, the scene was one of impending disaster. 5 T-34s were advancing on hastily prepared American infantry positions. Already, one tank had broken through the front line, its machine guns blazing as it crushed foxholes beneath its treads. The infantry was fighting back with desperate courage. Bazooka teams attempted to get close enough for killing shots, but the T-34's supporting infantry kept them at bay with small arms fire. Mitchell could see the battalion commander attempting to organize a coherent defense, but against armor in open ground, the outcome was inevitable without tank support. All units, deploy an overwatch position along this ridge, Mitchell ordered. Identify targets and prepare to fire on my command. As the tanks moved into position, Mitchell studied the battlefield with a practiced eye. The T-34s were focused entirely on the infantry, unaware of the American tanks now positioning on their flank. It was a perfect ambush scenario. Thunder 3, take the lead tank. Thunder 7, the one at the rear. Thunder 8 and 6 will target the middle 3 on my mark. Mitchell raised his binoculars, calculating ranges and deflection. All units, fire! 4 American tanks fired almost simultaneously. In the valley below, 3 T-34s erupted in flames immediately as 76mm and 90mm shells found vulnerable points in their armor. The 4th staggered as a shell damaged its turret but didn't penetrate. The 5th, at the rear of the formation, began to turn its turret toward the new threat, but took a second hit before it could complete the movement. Thunder 7, finish that damaged tank, Mitchell ordered. Thunder 8, watch for infantry with anti-tank weapons. The Sherman-designated Thunder 7 fired again, this time scoring a clean hit that penetrated the T-34's turret. The tank slewed to a stop, smoke pouring from its hatches. Below, the American infantry was rallying, their cheers audible even over the rain and the sounds of burning tanks. Bazooka teams moved forward to ensure the disabled T-34s were completely neutralized, while rifle companies re-established their defensive perimeter. Mitchell felt a moment of grim satisfaction. They'd prevented a massacre, at least here, but the main battle still raged, and they needed to return quickly. All units, form up. We're heading back to the main line. As they began to withdraw, the infantry battalion commander approached in a jeep, waving them down. Mitchell ordered a brief halt. Captain, I don't know where you came from, but you just saved my entire battalion, the infantry commander shouted up to Mitchell. Those T-34s would have rolled right through us. Just doing our job, Major, Mitchell replied. But we need to get back to our main position. There are more where those came from. We're right behind you. My men are already mounting up in our trucks. Least we can do is provide infantry support for your tanks after what you did for us. Mitchell nodded gratefully. Combined arms cooperation was always welcome, especially against a numerically superior enemy. We'll see you there, Major. Don't dawdle. As they made their way back toward the main defensive line, Mitchell noticed Lieutenant Lawson bringing his Pershing alongside. The young officer's expression had changed dramatically from the confident, somewhat arrogant demeanor he'd displayed in Japan. There was a new respect in his eyes, and something more, understanding. "Sir?" Lawson called over the engine noise. "I think I understand now what you were trying to teach me." "And what's that, Lieutenant?" Mitchell asked. "The manual said a tank platoon should never disengage from the main battle to chase a flanking force. By doctrine, we should have maintained our primary defensive line." Mitchell nodded. "That's what the manual says, and if we'd followed it, that infantry battalion would have been destroyed." Lawson's face showed the impact of this realization. Sometimes experience has to override doctrine. "Now you're thinking like a tank commander, Lieutenant, not just a tank officer." Mitchell offered a rare smile. "Keep it up, and you might make captain someday." As they crested the final ridge before their main position, the full scope of the ongoing battle came into view. The valley floor was littered with burning tanks, both North Korean and American. The remaining Shermans of the 118th were still in position, still fighting, but clearly under immense pressure. At least a dozen T-34s continued to press the attack, their superior numbers gradually overwhelming the American defenses. Mitchell keyed his radio. "Thunder 2, this is Thunder 6. We're back with 4 tanks and infantry support inbound. Status report?" The reply came through broken and static-filled. "Thunder 6, we've lost Thunder 4 and 5. Running low on ammunition, enemy still has 10-plus tanks operational, plus infantry support. They're preparing for another push. Hold position. We'll hit them from behind as they advance." Mitchell switched channels to address all his returning tanks. "All units, prepare for immediate engagement. We're going to catch them in crossfire between our positions." As they moved into attack positions, Mitchell reflected on the day's events. They'd achieved small victories, saved lives, but the larger battle was far from decided. The war that Harrison and the Pentagon had so confidently predicted would be dominated by air power, and modern doctrine was revealing itself to be what wars had always been: a bloody contest of wills fought by men in the mud, where experience and adaptation mattered more than theories developed in comfortable offices thousands of miles away. And it was only beginning. The real test of the Dinosaur Battalion still lay ahead. The North Korean T-34s began their final push up the slope toward the American positions, unaware of the 4 tanks now positioned behind them. Mitchell gave them time to fully commit to the attack, waiting until they were exposed on the open slope before giving the order. "All units, fire at will!" The battle was rejoined, steel against steel, man against man. As his 90mm gun thundered, Mitchell knew they were facing the fight of their lives. But for the first time since arriving in Korea, he felt a grim certainty. His dinosaurs might be outnumbered and outgunned, but they possessed something their enemy didn't: the hard-won wisdom that came only from experience. And sometimes that made all the difference between victory and defeat, between life and death, in the unforgiving calculus of war. The sun rose blood red over the Korean hills, painting the devastation of yesterday's battle in harsh crimson light. Captain James Mitchell stood amid the wreckage of destroyed tanks, both American and North Korean, mentally cataloging the cost of their victory. 8 T-34s lay shattered across the valley floor, blackened hulks still smoldering in the early morning mist. But the price had been steep. 3 Shermans lost, their crews evacuated just before the ammunition cooked off, and 1 Pershing with a damaged gun and track. Mitchell took a long pull from his canteen, the tepid water doing little to wash away the grit coating his throat. 24 hours of continuous combat had left him bone-weary, but there was no time for proper rest. Intelligence indicated the North Koreans were regrouping, bringing up reinforcements from their reserve units. The brief respite would be measured in hours, not days. Sergeant Peterson approached, his normally immaculate uniform now torn and stained with oil and soot. "Report from Scout 2, Cap. Enemy armor and infantry moving south along Route 11. Best estimate puts them here by nightfall." Mitchell nodded, studying the map Peterson handed him. "They're consolidating for a major push, trying to break through to the supply routes." He traced a finger along the paper. "What's the word from command?" Peterson's face tightened. "Retreat. They're pulling back the entire line to positions 15 miles south. We're ordered to fall back with them." "And leave this ground we just bled for?" Mitchell felt the familiar anger rising. "What about the high ground we secured?" Hill 468 overlooks the entire valley. If we abandon that, then the enemy will use it as a staging area to hit the new defensive line," Peterson finished. "I know, but those are the orders, straight from Harrison." Mitchell folded the map deliberately, buying time to control his temper. "Where's Lawson?" "Supervising repairs on his Pershing. Track damage wasn't as bad as we thought." "Get him here. And Jenkins and Wilson, too. We need to talk." While Peterson went to gather the others, Mitchell climbed onto his tank and scanned the terrain with his binoculars. Hill 468 dominated the landscape, a steep, wooded rise that commanded views of all approaching routes. In the right hands, with the right preparation, it could be held against superior numbers. Mitchell had seen it done before in the Ardennes, where a single well-positioned tank platoon had held off an entire German battle group for 2 crucial days. Lieutenant Lawson was the first to arrive, his uniform as disheveled as everyone else's, but his bearings still military straight. The past day's combat had changed him. The academic arrogance had been replaced by something harder, more grounded. Combat did that to a man, burned away pretensions faster than any flame. "You wanted to see me, sir?" Lawson asked, climbing up beside Mitchell. "What's your assessment of yesterday's engagement, Lieutenant?" Mitchell handed him the binoculars, gesturing toward Hill 468. Lawson studied the terrain carefully before answering. "We were effective when we controlled the high ground and could dictate the terms of engagement. Once they pushed us into defensive positions in the valley, their numerical advantage became decisive." He lowered the binoculars. "Classical military principle. Height confers advantage." "And if we abandon that hill," Mitchell prompted, "then we'll face the same enemy again, but they'll have the advantage we just sacrificed." Lawson hesitated. "Sir, are we being ordered to pull back?" "Yes, full withdrawal to positions 15 miles south by 1800 hours. Lawson's jaw tightened. "With respect, sir, that's a strategic error. Hill 468 is the key to this sector." Mitchell suppressed a smile. The lieutenant was learning. "My thoughts exactly." By the time Peterson returned with Jenkins and Wilson, Mitchell had formulated the beginnings of a plan. The 4 veterans and Lawson gathered around the hood of a jeep where Mitchell had spread out his maps. "Command wants us to abandon this position by 1800. I disagree." Mitchell looked each man in the eye. "Hill 468 is defensible, and it's the key terrain feature in this sector. If the North Koreans secure it, their next attack will roll right through the new defensive line." "So we're staying?" Jenkins asked, a grin spreading across his weathered face. "Not all of us," Mitchell replied. "Who's of the battalion will follow orders and withdraw. But I'm proposing we leave a small detachment on Hill 468 to delay the enemy advance and prevent them from using it as an artillery position." He tapped the map. "A rear guard, volunteers only." There was a moment of silence as the implications sank in. "How many tanks?" Peterson asked. 4. 2 Shermans, 2 Pershings. Enough to hold the critical approaches, but small enough to withdraw quickly if the situation becomes untenable. Wilson, the quiet mechanical genius, spoke up. "Resupply would be a problem. We'd be isolated once the main force pulls back." "We cache supplies on the hill before the withdrawal," Mitchell countered. "Ammunition, fuel, rations. Enough for 48 hours. By then, either the situation will have changed or—" He left the alternative unspoken. "I volunteer," Lawson said suddenly, his voice firm. "My crew and I will stay." Mitchell studied the young lieutenant, seeing past the fatigue to the determination beneath. "Are you sure? This won't be by the book, Lieutenant. It might even be considered a direct violation of orders." "The manual doesn't account for every tactical situation," Lawson replied, echoing Mitchell's earlier teachings. "Sometimes you have to adapt to the reality on the ground." Mitchell nodded, a flicker of pride warming his chest. "Peterson, you and your crew will take the 2nd Pershing. Jenkins, Wilson, your Shermans will cover the eastern and western approaches." "What about Harrison?" Peterson asked. "He's not going to like this." Mitchell's expression hardened. "By the time he realizes what we've done, it'll be too late to recall us without compromising the entire withdrawal. I'll take full responsibility." "We'll all take responsibility," Jenkins said firmly. "Been a long time since I disobeyed a direct order. Looking forward to remembering how it feels." The others chuckled, the gallows humor of soldiers who understood the risks but accepted them anyway. "Get your crews briefed," Mitchell ordered. "We have 6 hours to prepare our positions and cache our supplies. I want camouflage netting, defensive emplacements, and firing lanes cleared before the main force pulls out." As the others dispersed to their tasks, Lawson remained behind. "Sir, I need to ask, is this worth the risk? 4 tanks can't hope to stop a determined assault." Mitchell appreciated the question. It showed Lawson was thinking like a commander now, weighing costs against benefits. We're not trying to stop them, Lieutenant. We're buying time. Every hour we delay their advance from Hill 468 gives the main defensive line time to consolidate. And if we can bloody them enough, make the hill too costly to take, they might bypass it altogether. And if they don't, Mitchell met the younger man's gaze directly. Then we do as much damage as we can and find a way back to our lines under cover of darkness. He placed a hand on Lawson's shoulder. I'm not planning a suicide mission, Lieutenant, just a calculated risk. Lawson nodded, satisfied. I'll get my crew ready, sir. As Lawson walked away, Peterson returned with a small sheet of paper. Message from command just came in. Colonel Harrison is personally overseeing the withdrawal operation. He'll be here in 3 hours to ensure compliance with strategic directives. Mitchell grimaced. That complicates things. He'll countermand our plan immediately. Unless he doesn't know about it, Peterson suggested. We could move up our timetable, be in position before he arrives. Mitchell considered this, weighing options against risks. No, too rushed. We need proper preparation or this won't work. He thought for a moment longer. Have the crews load supplies and prepare as planned, but keep the tanks with the main unit for now. Once Harrison has verified that we're withdrawing, we'll circle back under cover of the general movement. Peterson grinned. Sneaky, I like it. Just like Normandy in 44, Mitchell replied. Remember how we slipped away from that column to ambush that German patrol? Caught hell for it after, though. Worth it then. Worth it now. Mitchell folded his map. Let's get moving. We've got a hill to fortify. The next 3 hours were a flurry of controlled activity. Under the guise of normal preparation for withdrawal, Mitchell's chosen tanks were loaded with extra ammunition, fuel, rations, and spare parts. Camouflage netting was bundled and secured to turrets, and each crew carefully inspected their vehicles for any mechanical issues that could compromise their mission. Mitchell personally walked the Hill 468 position, identifying the optimal placement for each tank. The north face offered the best defensive positions, with rocky outcroppings that would provide hold-down positions with excellent fields of fire across the most likely avenues of approach. He marked each spot with small piles of stones, reference points for when they would return under darkness. Lieutenant Lawson accompanied him on this reconnaissance, asking pertinent questions and offering observations that impressed Mitchell with their tactical insight. The crucible of combat was forging the young officer into something valuable, a leader who could balance theory with practical experience. We'll place your Pershing here, Mitchell indicated a natural depression behind a rocky shelf. You'll have a clear shot at the main road approach, but be protected from direct fire. Good position, Lawson agreed, studying the angle. Limited exposure, multiple withdrawal routes. But sir, what about air attacks? If they bring in fighter support, unlikely. Our Air Force has been keeping their planes occupied. But if they do, Mitchell pointed to the dense tree canopy that covered portions of the hill. We'll have positions prepared under cover. The key is mobility. Never stay in one spot long enough to become a fixed target. As they completed their survey, the distant sound of vehicle engines announced the arrival of Colonel Harrison's inspection team. Mitchell and Lawson hurried back down to the main encampment, where the battalion was making a convincing show of preparing for withdrawal. Harrison arrived in a small convoy of jeeps, his uniform immaculate despite the dusty conditions. He surveyed the area with obvious satisfaction, noting the tanks being serviced and loaded for movement. Captain Mitchell, he called as he spotted them approaching. I see you're complying with the withdrawal order. Good. I half expected to find you preparing some ill-advised last stand. Mitchell kept his expression neutral. Just following orders, Colonel. The battalion will be ready to move out at 1700 hours. Harrison nodded, but his eyes were suspicious. I'll be accompanying your unit personally during the withdrawal to observe your methods. We're honored by your interest, sir, Mitchell replied evenly, though inwardly he cursed. Harrison's presence would make their plans significantly more difficult to execute. I'm particularly interested in your tank deployment during the retrograde operation, Captain Harrison continued. Your unorthodox tactics yesterday require proper documentation and analysis. Of course, sir, I'll be happy to provide a full report once we've secured the new defensive line. Harrison gave a thin smile. I'm sure you will. Carry on. As Harrison moved off to speak with other officers, Peterson sidled up to Mitchell. That complicates things. He's watching us specifically. Mitchell nodded grimly. Time for Plan B. He glanced at his watch. The main withdrawal begins in 2 hours. We'll need to create a diversion, something to draw Harrison's attention away from our movements. I might have an idea, Lawson interjected quietly. Something from that old manual you don't think much of, sir. Mitchell raised an eyebrow. I'm listening, Lieutenant. Standard doctrine calls for a ceremonial transfer of command when an officer of Harrison's rank personally observes a tactical operation, Lawson explained. It's an administrative formality, but it requires his presence at the command post for at least 30 minutes while the paperwork is processed and unit disposition is formally logged. Mitchell smiled slowly, and during those 30 minutes, he won't be watching individual tank movements, Lawson finished. Lieutenant, I believe you're developing a healthy disrespect for unnecessary protocol, Mitchell said approvingly. Make it happen. At precisely 1630 hours, as the battalion began its preliminary movements for withdrawal, Lieutenant Lawson approached Colonel Harrison with a clipboard full of official forms and a respectfully apologetic expression. Colonel, before we commence withdrawal, regulations require a formal transfer of operational oversight, Lawson explained, sounding every inch the by-the-book West Point graduate. If you could join us at the command post to review and sign these documents. Harrison looked annoyed but nodded curtly. Very well, Lieutenant. Lead the way. As Harrison was escorted to the command tent, Mitchell gave the signal. The 4 designated tanks, engines already warmed and ready, began moving not south with the main column but east, using a shallow ravine to mask their departure from the command post view. Peterson's Pershing led the way, followed by the 2 Shermans, with Lawson's tank slot kept empty until he could rejoin them. Mitchell climbed aboard his own Pershing, feeling the familiar vibration of the powerful engine through the commander's seat. His crew worked with practiced efficiency, requiring few orders. They understood the mission and its risks. Thunder 6 moving out, Mitchell radioed to the other tanks. Maintain radio discipline from this point forward. Use Channel 3 for emergencies only. The small column wound its way through the ravine for nearly a mile before turning north, circling back toward Hill 468 through terrain that would conceal their movement from both the withdrawing American forces and any North Korean observers. As they approached the hill from its southern face, Mitchell checked his watch. Lawson should be wrapping up the administrative delay tactic by now. The lieutenant had instructions to claim mechanical trouble with his tank, which would allow him to drop back in the withdrawal column and then divert to join them. The sun was low on the horizon when they reached their predetermined positions on Hill 468. Peterson's Pershing took up station covering the northwestern approach, while the 2 Shermans manned the eastern and western flanks respectively. Mitchell positioned his own tank at the center of their small perimeter, where he could provide supporting fire to any sector under pressure. The crews worked quickly to establish their positions, digging shallow depressions where possible and arranging camouflage netting to break up the distinctive silhouettes of their vehicles. Ammunition was distributed among prepared positions, allowing the tanks to relocate without sacrificing firepower. As twilight deepened into dusk, Mitchell grew concerned about Lawson's absence. The lieutenant should have rejoined them by now. Had Harrison seen through their ruse? Cap, Peterson called softly from his position nearby. Movement on the south slope. Mitchell raised his binoculars, focusing on the shadowy tree line below. A lone figure was making its way carefully up the hill, occasionally stopping to check for observers. Hold fire, Mitchell ordered quietly. I think our missing lieutenant has arrived. Sure enough, Lawson emerged from the trees minutes later, breathing hard from the steep climb. Mitchell met him at the perimeter. Report, Lieutenant. Where's your tank? Lawson grimaced. Harrison wasn't fooled for long, sir. When I tried to fall back in the column, he ordered me to ride in his command vehicle. I had to wait until we were 5 miles south before I could slip away. Staff Sergeant Rawlins has my tank, but Harrison's watching them too closely. They won't be able to join us. Mitchell absorbed this setback. 1 less tank significantly reduced their firepower and flexibility. Your crew? Ordered to continue with the main force. I came back alone. Lawson straightened. I know it's not ideal, sir, but I couldn't let you do this without me. Mitchell studied the younger man with newfound respect. Lawson had risked serious disciplinary action to return on foot to a position that would likely come under heavy attack within hours. That showed courage and commitment beyond what Mitchell had expected. We'll make do with 3 tanks, Mitchell decided. You'll take over as my gunner. Johnson won't mind moving to loader position. Lawson nodded, relieved. Thank you, sir. What's our status? Positions established. Supply caches buried at fallback points. We're as ready as we can be. Mitchell led Lawson to his Pershing, where the crew made room for the additional man. Harrison know you're gone yet? Probably. I left about an hour ago. Once they realize I'm not with the column, they'll assume you're heading back to our lines, not up here, Mitchell finished. By the time they figure it out, we'll have done what we came to do. Full darkness fell across the Korean hills, bringing with it a damp chill that penetrated clothing and settled into bones. The tank crews maintained the watch in rotation, 2 men awake at each vehicle while the others grabbed what sleep they could in the cramped confines. Mitchell couldn't sleep. He sat in the commander's position of his Pershing, scanning the darkness with binoculars that revealed little beyond vague shapes and shadows. Beside him, Lawson maintained similar vigilance, occasionally adjusting the tank's infrared spotlight, a new piece of technology that could illuminate the battlefield without visible light, though its range was limited. "Sir," Lawson spoke softly, breaking the long silence. "May I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "How do you handle it? The waiting before combat? It seems harder than the fighting itself." Mitchell considered the question. "You fill the time with useful preparation, check equipment, review plans, look after your men." He paused. "But if you're asking how to handle the fear, there's no simple answer. Everyone feels it. The difference is in what you do with it." "What do you do with it, sir?" "I acknowledge it, then set it aside. Fear is like pain. It's information. It tells you something's dangerous. Once you've registered that information, dwelling on it serves no purpose." Lawson nodded slowly. "At West Point, they taught us that courage is acting despite fear. But they never really explained how to manage the fear itself. Some things can't be taught in a classroom, Lieutenant. You're learning them now, the hard way." Mitchell handed Lawson his canteen. "What matters isn't whether you're afraid, it's whether you let that fear control your decisions." Before Lawson could respond, a faint sound reached them, the low, distant rumble of engines. Many engines moving slowly but steadily closer. "They're coming," Mitchell said, instantly alert, earlier than expected. He keyed his radio, speaking in a hushed tone. "All units, sound check. Enemy approaching from the north. Estimated time to contact 30 minutes. Maintain blackout conditions." One by one, the other tanks acknowledged. The waiting was over. Now would come the test of their preparation, their courage, and their determination to hold this vital ground against superior numbers. Mitchell dropped down into the tank where the rest of his crew was already stirring. "Start engine, minimum idle." Johnson, load armor piercing. Lawson, traverse to bearing 3D30 and stand by. The Pershing's powerful engine rumbled to life, carefully throttled down to reduce noise. Around the hill, the other tanks were similarly preparing, a quiet hum of controlled power building in the darkness. Through his periscope, Mitchell could now make out movement along the valley floor. The distinctive silhouettes of T-34-85s, moving in a disciplined column formation toward the hill. He counted at least 10 tanks, accompanied by troop carriers and support vehicles. A significant force intent on securing the high ground before dawn. "They're not waiting for daylight," Mitchell observed. "Bold move. They must know the main force has withdrawn." "Or they think we've all pulled back," Lawson suggested, his eye pressed to the gunner's sight. "They might not be expecting resistance. Either way, we let them get closer before we reveal our position." Mitchell checked his watch. When they reach the base of the hill, they'll have to bunch up to navigate the approach road. That's when we hit them. The minutes ticked by with excruciating slowness as the North Korean force approached. Mitchell could feel the tension building in his crew, the controlled breathing and focused silence of men preparing for combat. At last, the lead T-34 reached the first switchback of the road that climbed Hill 468. Behind it, the rest of the column began to compress, exactly as Mitchell had predicted. Tanks and vehicles clustered together at the narrow approach, creating a perfect target. "All units," Mitchell radioed, his voice calm and measured. "Fire on my command. Target lead vehicles first, then work back through the column." He waited until the lead T-34 had completed the first switchback turn, fully committing the column to the ascent. "Fire!" The night erupted with muzzle flashes as 3 American tanks fired almost simultaneously. The 90mm rounds from the Pershings found their marks with devastating effect. The lead T-34 erupted in flames, its ammunition cooking off in secondary explosions that illuminated the entire hillside. The second tank in line took a direct hit from Peterson's Pershing, its turrets spinning off from the hull in a spectacular display of destructive force. Jenkins's Sherman hit the third tank, the 76mm round penetrating the thinner top armor as the T-34 tilted upward on the steep road. Wilson's tank targeted one of the troop carriers, sending it careening off the narrow track in a ball of flame. The sudden, coordinated attack threw the North Korean column into momentary confusion. Vehicles halted or attempted to reverse, creating a traffic jam on the narrow road. Infantry spilled from the troop carriers, seeking cover among the rocks and vegetation. "Gunner, next target, troop carrier at the rear," Mitchell directed Lawson. "Driver, prepare to reposition after this shot." Lawson acquired the target, adjusting for elevation with practiced ease. "On target. Fire!" The Pershing's gun thundered, sending another 90mm round downrange. The shell struck the troop carrier squarely, igniting its fuel tank and creating another obstacle in the enemy's path. "Driver, back 20 yards, then right to position Bravo," Mitchell ordered. The tank lurched backward, then maneuvered to a secondary firing position they had prepared earlier. This constant movement between prepared positions was crucial to their strategy, making it difficult for the enemy to pinpoint their locations. The North Koreans recovered quickly from their initial shock. T-34s that hadn't been caught in the kill zone began to deploy off the road, seeking firing positions on the lower slopes. Infantry moved up using natural cover, their small arms fire pinging ineffectively off the American tank's armor. "They're splitting up," Peterson reported over the radio. "I count at least 4 T-34s moving to the northeast slope." "Jenkins, Wilson, shift to cover the eastern approach," Mitchell ordered. "We'll handle the ones on the road." For the next hour, Hill 468 became the scene of a vicious firefight. The American tanks used their superior positions and prepared fields of fire to deadly effect, destroying 3 more T-34s and numerous support vehicles. But the North Korean force was determined and adaptable. Their remaining tanks established hold-down positions on the lower slopes, exchanging fire with the defenders, while their infantry gradually worked their way uphill, using the terrain for cover. "Sir, infantry approaching from the west," Johnson reported, peering through his viewport. "They've got satchel charges." "Traverse left. Load high explosive," Mitchell ordered immediately. Infantry with explosives were a serious threat to stationary tanks. "Fire when ready." Lawson swung the turret around, acquiring the cluster of advancing soldiers. The 90mm gun fired, the high explosive round impacting among the infantry and sending bodies flying. But more were coming, using the darkness and terrain to mask their approach. "Peterson, we need machine gun fire on the western slope," Mitchell radioed. "Infantry with demolition charges getting too close." "Moving to support now," Peterson acknowledged. Mitchell's tank fired again, the coaxial machine gun shattering to life between main gun rounds. The combined firepower temporarily halted the infantry advance. But Mitchell knew it was only a reprieve. The North Koreans had realized they couldn't take the hill with a frontal assault and were now attempting to flank the defenders, probing for weaknesses. As dawn approached, the situation grew increasingly precarious. The 3 American tanks had been forced to expend a significant portion of their ammunition. 2 T-34s had managed to establish positions with good fields of fire, pinning down Jenkins's Sherman and making movement between positions hazardous. "Thunder 6, this is Thunder 2, Peterson's voice crackled over the radio. "We're down to 20 rounds for the main gun. Enemy infantry has reached the upper western slope. Request permission to fall back to secondary positions." Mitchell checked his map. The secondary positions were higher up the hill, offering less advantageous firing angles but better overall defensive coverage. "Approved. Execute in sequence. Thunder 4, provide covering fire for Thunder 2's movement. Then Thunder 4 falls back under our cover." The carefully choreographed withdrawal to tighter defensive positions was executed with professional precision. Peterson's Pershing moved first, backing up the steep slope to the secondary position, while Jenkins' Sherman laid down suppressive fire. Then Jenkins moved back, protected by fire from Mitchell's tank. As they consolidated their new perimeter, Mitchell assessed their situation. They had destroyed or disabled at least 7 enemy tanks and multiple support vehicles. The cost had been high in ammunition, but so far all 3 American tanks remained operational. More importantly, they had denied the enemy control of Hill 468 through the night, buying crucial time for the main defensive line to prepare. "New contacts," Lawson reported suddenly, his eye fixed to the periscope. "Multiple vehicles approaching from the north road, larger than T-34s. Mitchell shifted to his own viewing port, focusing on the distant shapes moving toward the hill. What he saw sent a chill through him. IS-2 heavy tanks, at least 2 of them. The Joseph Stalin tanks were formidable opponents, armed with 122mm guns that could penetrate a Pershing's armor with ease. They must have brought up their reserves. "Sir, should we withdraw now?" Lawson asked quietly. "We've accomplished our mission, held the hill through the night." Mitchell considered the question carefully. The arrival of IS-2 heavy tanks significantly altered the tactical equation. Their 122mm guns outranged and outpunched anything the Americans had. A direct confrontation would likely end poorly. "Not yet," Mitchell decided. "We still have a job to do. Those heavies are slow, especially on these roads. We can delay them, too." He keyed his radio. "All units, be advised. Enemy heavy tanks approaching from the north. IS-2 class, 2 confirmed. We will engage at maximum range, then fall back by bounds. Prioritize mobility over firepower. Aim for tracks and road wheels." The sun was just breaking over the eastern horizon when the first IS-2 came within range. Its massive form dwarfed the T-34s that accompanied it, the long 122mm guns sweeping slowly as it searched for targets. "Range 2,800 yards, Lawson reported, adjusting his sights. "Extreme range for accurate fire." "They outrange us, but their first shot will reveal our position," Mitchell noted. "So we shoot first. Aim for the lead vehicle, driver's viewport. Fire when ready." Lawson took a deep breath, made a final adjustment, and squeezed the trigger. The Pershing rocked back as its gun fired, the shell arcing toward the distant target. A near miss, the round impacting just in front of the IS-2 and showering its front with dirt and debris. The heavy tank immediately returned fire, its massive 122mm gun belching flame. The shell screamed overhead, missing Mitchell's tank but announcing the deadly serious nature of this new threat. "Adjust aim, 2 mils right," Mitchell ordered calmly. "Fire again." Lawson made the correction and fired. This time the round struck the IS-2's forward hull, but at this range it merely scarred the thick armor without penetrating. "Driver, reverse pattern delta," Mitchell commanded. "Gunner, keep firing. Target tracks and running gear." The Pershing began backing up in a zigzag pattern, making itself a more difficult target while Lawson continued to engage the heavy tank. Peterson and Jenkins followed similar tactics, their tanks emerging briefly from cover to fire, then disappearing again before the IS-2s could get an accurate fix on their positions. For nearly 30 minutes, this deadly dance continued. The American tanks would fire, maneuver, and relocate, gradually falling back to higher positions as they delayed the enemy advance. The IS-2s pressed forward methodically, their massive shells cratering the hillside but failing to score direct hits on the elusive defenders. Then disaster struck. Jenkins' Sherman, repositioning after firing, struck a rocky outcrop that damaged its left track. The tank slewed sideways, momentarily exposed as its crew struggled to regain control. One of the IS-2s fired immediately. The 122mm shell struck the Sherman just below its turret ring, penetrating completely through the thinner side armor. The tank erupted in flames, secondary explosions sending its turret cartwheeling through the air. "Thunder 4's hit," Peterson shouted over the radio. "Direct penetration." Mitchell watched in horror as the Sherman burned. "Any survivors?" There was a moment of tense silence before Peterson responded. "2 crew members bailing out. Jenkins and his gunner. They're making for the eastern ravine." "Cover them," Mitchell ordered, swinging his tank's gun toward the IS-2 that had scored the kill. "Fire at will." Both remaining American tanks opened fire on the heavy tanks, not to destroy them, but to distract them, while Jenkins and his gunner escaped. The tactic worked, drawing the IS-2's attention long enough for the survivors to reach the relative safety of the ravine. But the loss of Jenkins' Sherman was a critical blow to their already thin defenses. With only 2 tanks remaining and ammunition running low, Mitchell knew they couldn't hold the hill much longer. "Thunder 2, begin final withdrawal sequence," he radioed to Peterson. "We'll cover you to the rally point, then fall back ourselves." "Copy that," Peterson acknowledged. "Beginning withdrawal now." As Peterson's Pershing began backing toward their predetermined escape route, Mitchell's tank maintained a steady fire on the advancing enemy. Lawson worked the gun with grim determination, each shot carefully placed to maximize disruptive effect without wasting precious ammunition. The IS-2s continued their relentless advance, now supported by the remaining T-34s and infantry. They were less than 800 yards from the summit, their superior firepower beginning to tell as they established fire positions. "Thunder 2 has reached the rally point," Peterson reported, "ready to cover your withdrawal." "Copy that," Mitchell responded. "Thunder 6 beginning final withdrawal. Driver, reverse course, maximum speed to rally point. As his Pershing began backing up the last stretch of hillside toward their escape route, a massive explosion rocked the tank. A 122mm shell had impacted just yards away, sending shrapnel pinging against their armor and momentarily stunning the crew. "Status report," Mitchell demanded once his ears stopped ringing. "Engine still operational," the driver called back. "But we're losing hydraulic pressure in the turret system." Mitchell grimaced. Losing turret hydraulics meant they would have to traverse manually, a slow and laborious process. "Continue withdrawal." Lawson switched to manual traverse and maintain rear coverage. The damaged Pershing limped backward, its turret slowly rotating as Lawson cranked the manual controls. Peterson's tank provided covering fire from its position at the rally point, forcing the advancing enemy to move more cautiously. Just as they were about to reach the relative safety of the reverse slope, Mitchell spotted movement to their right flank. A T-34 had circled around and was now in position for a side shot at Peterson's stationary tank. "Thunder 2, right flank," Mitchell shouted into the radio. "T-34 at 3 o'clock." Peterson began to rotate his turret, but the T-34 fired first. Its 85mm shell struck Peterson's Pershing in the side, not penetrating but damaging the track assembly and immobilizing the tank. "We're hit," Peterson radioed, his voice tight but controlled. "Track destroyed. Can still fire but can't move." Mitchell made an instant decision. "Hold position and continue firing. We're coming to you." "Negative, Thunder 6, Peterson replied firmly. "Continue with the withdrawal plan. We'll cover you as long as possible." "That wasn't a request, Sergeant," Mitchell snapped. "Driver, move us alongside Thunder 2. We're not leaving them." The driver complied, bringing their damaged Pershing beside Peterson's immobilized tank. Together, the two vehicles established a final defensive position, their guns covering the approaches to the summit of Hill 468. "Sir," Lawson said quietly, "we can't hold this position indefinitely." "We don't need to," Mitchell replied, checking his watch. "It's 0730. We've held this hill for 12 hours. Given the main line 2 full nights to prepare. That was the mission." He keyed his radio. "Peterson, prepare to abandon tank. We'll take your crew aboard and make a fighting withdrawal together." "There isn't room for both crews in one tank, Captain," Peterson pointed out. "There is if we leave the extra ammunition behind," Mitchell countered. "It's tight but doable for a short distance." As Peterson's crew began transferring to Mitchell's tank, the enemy fire intensified. The IS-2s had reached positions where they could fire directly onto the summit, their massive shells walking closer with each shot. Infantry fire began pinging off their armor as the North Korean soldiers closed in. "Last man aboard," Peterson reported as he squeezed into Mitchell's already crowded tank. "But they've got us nearly surrounded, Cap. Eastern escape route is cut off." Mitchell studied his map, looking for alternatives. "We'll go west, down through the ravine. It's too steep for their tanks to follow quickly." He turned to his driver. "Maximum speed once we clear this position. Don't stop for anything." "Sir, what about Jenkins and his gunner?" Lawson asked suddenly. "They went east." Mitchell felt the weight of command pressing down on him. Jenkins and his gunner had headed in the opposite direction from their planned escape route. Going after them would risk everyone in the tank. "They're experienced veterans," Mitchell said finally. "They'll make their way back to our lines. We have to trust them to survive on their own." Lawson nodded, understanding the impossible choice. "Everyone secure?" Mitchell asked, looking around at the cramped interior where 7 men now occupied space designed for 5. "Driver, move out. West Ravine, best possible speed." The overloaded Pershing lurched forward, its engine straining under the additional weight. As they cleared the summit position, a massive explosion erupted behind them. Peterson's abandoned tank had taken a direct hit from one of the IS-2s, its ammunition cooking off in a spectacular fireball that momentarily illuminated the entire hillside. "That should give them something to think about," Peterson commented grimly. Mitchell's tank plunged down the western slope of Hill 468, following a narrow game trail that dropped steeply into a thickly wooded ravine. The going was treacherous, the tank occasionally sliding on the loose soil and rocks, but their pursuers would have an even harder time following with their heavier vehicles. As they reached the bottom of the ravine and began making their way south toward friendly lines, Mitchell allowed himself a moment to reflect on what they had accomplished. They had denied the enemy a critical piece of terrain for over 12 hours, inflicted significant casualties, and gathered valuable intelligence on North Korean tactics and equipment. But the cost had been high, Jenkins and his gunner missing, possibly captured or killed. Peterson's tank destroyed, his own vehicle damaged and overloaded, and they still had miles of enemy-held territory to traverse before reaching safety. "Sir," Lawson spoke up from his cramped position at the gunner station, "for what it's worth, I think we did the right thing back there, holding the hill." Mitchell nodded, appreciating the comment but too focused on their current predicament to dwell on it. "We're not out of this yet, Lieutenant. Save the assessment for when we reach our lines." The damaged Pershing continued its precarious journey south. 7 men united in their determination to complete one final mission, getting home alive. The first rays of dawn illuminated the battered tank as it crested a small rise 5 miles south of Hill 468. Mitchell stood in the commander's hatch, binoculars trained on the terrain ahead, searching for signs of friendly forces. Behind them, the sound of distant artillery signaled that the battle for Hill 468 continued. The North Koreans had secured the position after their withdrawal, but were now under fire from American artillery at the main defensive line, exactly as Mitchell had hoped. By delaying the enemy advance and forcing them to commit significant resources to taking the hill, they had given the main force time to prepare an effective response. "I think I see our forward positions," Mitchell announced, focusing his binoculars on a series of freshly dug entrenchments across a shallow valley. American flags about 2 miles ahead. A palpable sense of relief swept through the exhausted crew. They had been driving through enemy territory for hours, avoiding roads and patrols, pushing their damaged tank to its limits. "Think they'll be happy to see us?" Peterson asked wryly. "Harrison won't be," Mitchell replied with a grim smile. "But I suspect the line commanders will appreciate what we've done." As they approached the American lines, Mitchell ordered their tanks' recognition signals deployed, colored panels arranged on the turret in that day's identification pattern. Still, they advanced cautiously, aware that nervous troops might fire on any tank approaching from enemy territory. A mile from the American positions, they were met by a reconnaissance jeep carrying a young lieutenant and a radio operator. The lieutenant gaped openly at the battered Pershing with its overloaded crew. "Captain Mitchell?" he asked incredulously. "118th Tank Battalion? Sir, you're listed as missing in action, presumed captured or killed." "Reports of our demise were premature, Lieutenant," Mitchell replied dryly. "We need to speak with your commanding officer immediately. We have critical intelligence on enemy strength and disposition in this sector." The lieutenant directed them to the nearest command post, where they were met by Colonel Matthews of the 25th Infantry Division. Unlike Harrison, Matthews was a combat veteran who recognized the value of what Mitchell's team had accomplished. "You held Hill 468 against a reinforced enemy battalion with just 3 tanks?" Matthews asked, studying the marked-up map Mitchell had presented. "Including 2 IS-2 heavy tanks? That's extraordinary." "We had the advantage of preparation and position, sir," Mitchell explained modestly, "and the enemy wasn't expecting resistance. Still, it was a remarkable achievement." Matthews looked up from the map. "Your actions gave us time to establish this defensive line properly. Artillery is registered on all approaches now. We can hold this position." "What about Jenkins and his gunner, sir?" Lawson asked. "Any word?" Matthews shook his head. "No reports of stragglers or escaped personnel from your unit, but that doesn't mean anything definitive. They could still make it back." Mitchell nodded, hoping it was true, but realistic about the chances. Jenkins was tough and resourceful, but the odds against 2 men on foot in enemy territory were steep. "I should warn you, Captain," Matthews continued, "Colonel Harrison has been quite vocal about your unauthorized action. He's filed formal charges of insubordination and dereliction of duty." Mitchell had expected as much. "I accept full responsibility, sir. The others were following my orders." "Like hell," Peterson interjected. "We all volunteered. We all knew what we were doing." "Sergeant Peterson is right," Lawson added firmly. "This was a collective decision. We all believed it was the correct tactical choice." Matthews studied them thoughtfully. "For what it's worth, I agree with your assessment. Hill 468 was a key terrain feature. Delaying the enemy there undoubtedly saved lives along this line." He closed his map case. "But that's for the review board to decide. For now, your men need rest and medical attention. We'll sort out the administrative details later." As they left the command post, Mitchell felt the full weight of the past 24 hours descend upon him. Every muscle ached, his eyes burned from lack of sleep, and the responsibility for Jenkins and his gunner sat heavily on his conscience. "What happens now, sir?" Lawson asked as they walked toward the medical station. "Now we get checked out, get some food and sleep. Then we prepare our reports." Mitchell glanced back toward the distant hill they had defended. "And we hope that what we did makes a difference in the larger battle." "It already has," Peterson said confidently. Those North Koreans won't forget the welcome they got on Hill 468 anytime soon. Mitchell nodded, allowing himself a small smile of satisfaction. They had done what experienced soldiers had always done in desperate situations: adapted, persevered, and overcome. The Dinosaur Battalion might be considered obsolete by Pentagon standards, but they had proven their worth when it mattered most. As they reached the medical station, a commotion at the perimeter drew their attention. Two figures were being escorted in by a patrol, both filthy and exhausted, but unmistakably American. "Jenkins!" Peterson exclaimed, breaking into a grin. The grizzled tank commander looked up, his weathered face splitting into an equally broad smile when he spotted them. "Told you old tankers are hard to kill, Captain." Mitchell felt a wave of relief wash over him. Against all odds, Jenkins and his gunner had made it back. The mission was truly complete now. They had held the hill, gathered vital intelligence, and brought their people home. As medical personnel converged on the newly arrived survivors, Mitchell found Lawson watching him with newfound respect. "You know what this means, sir?" the young lieutenant asked. "Harrison's accusations won't stand. Not with what we accomplished." "That's not why we did it, Lieutenant," Mitchell reminded him. "We did it because it was the right tactical decision." "I know that now," Lawson replied thoughtfully. "The manual said to withdraw, but experience said to hold the high ground." He extended his hand. "Thank you for teaching me the difference between doctrine and judgment." Mitchell shook the offered hand, recognizing that Lawson had crossed an important threshold in his development as an officer. The young lieutenant had learned what no academy could teach, that in the crucible of combat, it was the human element that ultimately decided victory or defeat. The war would continue, with more battles to be fought and more hills to be defended or taken. But for Captain James Mitchell and the men of the Dinosaur Battalion, their most important victory had already been won. They had proven that experience, courage, and adaptability would always be the most valuable weapons in any soldier's arsenal, regardless of age or technology. In the gathering daylight, as artillery thundered in the distance and men prepared for the next phase of the endless struggle, Mitchell took one last look toward Hill 468. They had left their mark there, written in fire and steel, a testament to the enduring truth that in war, as in life, wisdom came not from manuals or theories, but from the hard-won lessons of those who had faced the ultimate test and emerged stronger for it. The dinosaurs, it seemed, were not extinct after all. 3 days after the defense of Hill 468, Captain James Mitchell stood at attention in the makeshift headquarters of the 25th Infantry Division. The room was sparse, just a few folding tables covered with maps and a single electric light hanging from the ceiling. Across from him, seated behind a field desk, Colonel Walter Harrison glared with barely concealed contempt. Insubordination, disregard for direct orders, reckless endangerment of equipment and personnel. Harrison read from a sheet of paper, each charge emphasized with a tap of his finger against the desk. "Your actions at Hill 468 constitute a serious breach of military discipline, Captain Mitchell." Mitchell remained silent, his weathered face revealing nothing. After 25 years of service, he knew when to speak and when to listen. This was a time for listening. "You were explicitly ordered to withdraw with the rest of your battalion," Harrison continued. "Instead, you took it upon yourself to remain in an exposed position against numerically superior forces. 3 tanks lost, men missing in action, all because you thought you knew better than command." Mitchell finally spoke, his voice calm and measured. "Permission to address the charges, sir." Harrison waved a hand dismissively. "Go ahead, though I doubt there's anything you can say that will justify such a flagrant violation of orders." "We held Hill 468 for 12 hours against an enemy force that would have otherwise secured it unopposed," Mitchell stated. "During that time, we destroyed 7 T-34s, 2 IS-2 heavy tanks, and multiple support vehicles. We disrupted their timetable and provided intelligence on their strength and disposition that has proven invaluable to our current defensive line." "Results don't justify disobedience, Captain," Harrison snapped. "That's not how a disciplined military functions." "With respect, sir, sometimes they do." Mitchell met Harrison's gaze directly. The tactical situation on the ground required adaptation. Hill 468 was key terrain that dominated the approaches to our new defensive line. Abandoning it without contest gave the enemy a significant advantage. "That assessment wasn't yours to make." Harrison's voice rose slightly, his frustration evident. "We have a chain of command for a reason. Strategic decisions are made by those with the full picture, not by field officers acting on limited information. Before Mitchell could respond, the tent flap opened and Colonel Matthews entered. The commander of the 25th Infantry Division nodded to both men. "Gentlemen, I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all, Colonel," Harrison replied, his tone immediately more respectful. "I was just explaining to Captain Mitchell the seriousness of his actions." Matthews studied Mitchell for a moment, then turned to Harrison. "I've just come from a briefing with General Walker. The situation has changed. I think you'll both want to hear this." He unfolded a map on the desk, pointing to their current position, and then to a series of arrows indicating enemy movements. "Intelligence confirms that the North Koreans are consolidating for a major push along this axis, aimed directly at our supply lines to Pusan. They're bringing up their reserve armor units, including more IS-2s than we anticipated. Current estimates suggest at least a regiment strength attack within the next 48 hours. Harrison frowned, studying the map. "Our current defensive line should be able to hold them, assuming air support is available." "That's just it," Matthews continued grimly. "Weather forecasts indicate a major front moving in, low cloud ceiling, poor visibility. Air operations will be severely limited for at least 3 days." Mitchell felt a familiar tightening in his gut. The same conditions that had hampered air support during their defense of Hill 468 would now affect the entire front. Without air power to compensate for their shortfall in armor, the situation would become critical. "General Walker is ordering a strategic withdrawal to more defensible positions near Yongsan," Matthews explained. "But we need to delay the enemy advance to give our supply columns time to pull back. Otherwise, we risk losing significant material and creating a logistical nightmare." Harrison's expression had grown increasingly concerned as Matthews spoke. "What's the plan, sir?" Matthews turned to Mitchell. "Captain, your action at Hill 468, while unorthodox, demonstrated the effectiveness of determined resistance at key choke points. The general wants to implement a similar strategy on a larger scale." He tapped a location on the map. "Specifically here, at Hill 518. Mitchell studied the position. Like Hill 468, it dominated the surrounding terrain, overlooking a valley through which the North Korean advance would likely come. The slopes were steeper, offering better defensive positions, but making withdrawal more challenging. "You want us to hold Hill 518, Mitchell said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, but not just your remaining tanks. We're creating a task force. 2 companies of infantry, your tanks, and whatever artillery we can spare." Matthews looked Mitchell in the eye. "General Walker wants you to command it." Harrison's head snapped up. "Sir, Captain Mitchell is facing serious disciplinary charges. Giving him a command under these circumstances—" "The charges are suspended," Matthews interrupted. "General Walker's orders. We need experienced tank commanders who understand delaying actions. And Captain Mitchell has proven himself in exactly this type of operation." Mitchell kept his face neutral, but inwardly he felt a complex mix of emotions. Vindication, certainly, but also the heavy weight of responsibility. This would be a larger-scale operation with many more lives at stake. "How long do we need to hold it, sir?" he asked. 24 hours minimum. 36 would be ideal." Matthews didn't sugarcoat the difficulty. "It won't be easy, Captain. Intelligence suggests you'll be facing elements of the 105th Armored Division. They've been reinforced with new equipment from the Soviet Union." Mitchell nodded slowly. "We'll hold it, sir." "Now wait just a minute," Harrison objected. "This is completely irregular. Captain Mitchell should at least—" "Colonel Harrison," Matthews cut in, his voice suddenly steel-edged. "Perhaps I wasn't clear. These are direct orders from General Mawaskis. The tactical situation demands immediate action by our most qualified personnel." He paused, letting the words sink in. "However, your concerns about command structure are noted. You'll accompany the task force as an observer. You can provide a full report on Captain Mitchell's performance upon completion of the mission." Harrison's face flushed, but military discipline prevailed. "Yes, sir." "Good." Matthews turned back to Mitchell. "You have 4 hours to assemble your force and move out, Captain. Lieutenant Lawson will serve as your executive officer. I understand he performed well at Hill 468. "He did, sir," Mitchell confirmed. "He's a quick learner." "Excellent. Sergeant Peterson will coordinate your tank elements. Your remaining operational tanks are being serviced now, and we've managed to find 2 more Pershings to add to your command." Matthews rolled up the map and handed it to Mitchell. "Complete briefing materials will be delivered to your staging area within the hour. Questions?" Mitchell had several, but they could wait for the detailed briefing. "No, sir, we'll be ready." Matthews nodded approvingly. "I know you will, Captain." He turned to leave, then paused at the tent flap. "One more thing. The men are calling your unit the Old Guard now. Seems the Dinosaur Battalion nickname has evolved. After Matthews departed, Harrison rose from behind the desk, his expression cold. Don't think this changes anything, Mitchell. You may have impressed General Walker with your cowboy tactics, but when this war settles into a proper military campaign, there won't be room for officers who can't follow orders. Mitchell met the colonel's gaze steadily. With respect, sir, I think there will always be room for officers who can adapt to battlefield realities. He saluted crisply. If you'll excuse me, I have a task force to organize. Outside the headquarters, Mitchell found Peterson waiting, an unlit cigarette dangling from his lips. The sergeant straightened as Mitchell approached. How'd it go with Harrison? About as expected, Mitchell replied. But it doesn't matter now. We've got a new mission. He quickly outlined Matthews' orders. Peterson whistled softly. Hill 518, that's going to be a tough nut. Steeper than 468, less cover on the approaches. All the better for defensive positions, Mitchell noted, if we can get properly dug in before they hit us. What about Jenkins and Wilson? They fit to return to duty? Mitchell nodded. Medical cleared them this morning. Jenkins is still favoring that leg, but he says he can command a tank. He checked his watch. Round everyone up. Briefing in 30 minutes at the motor pool. As Peterson hurried off, Mitchell took a moment to collect his thoughts. This mission would be different from Hill 468. Larger scale, more moving parts, more lives depending on his decisions. But the core principles remain the same. Use the terrain to maximum advantage. Conserve ammunition. Make the enemy pay for every inch of ground. He found Lieutenant Lawson at the tank repair yard, supervising the installation of a new radio in one of the Pershings. The young officer had changed noticeably in the past week. The textbook perfectionism remained in his attention to detail, but there was a new confidence in his bearing, tempered by the humility that comes only from combat experience. Lieutenant, Mitchell called. Got a minute? Lawson joined him, wiping grease from his hands. Sir, I heard we might be moving out soon. Sooner than soon. 4 hours. Mitchell briefly explained the situation and Lawson's role as executive officer. This will be bigger than Hill 468. 2 infantry companies, 6 tanks, and artillery support. I need you to coordinate between our armor and the infantry units. Lawson absorbed the information with professional focus. The infantry commanders, will they accept direction from a tank officer? It was a good question, showing Lawson's growing understanding of inter-service realities. Matthews is issuing clear orders about the chain of command, but it'll help if we show them we value their expertise. Mitchell tapped the map case under his arm. I want you at the briefing when I lay out the defensive plan. The infantry officers need to see that we're incorporating their capabilities into the overall strategy. I understand, sir. Lawson hesitated, then asked, what about Colonel Harrison? He'll be there as an observer, Mitchell replied, not hiding his distaste for the arrangement. Ignore him. Focus on the mission. The briefing took place in a maintenance tent hastily converted to a command post. Company commanders and platoon leaders crowded around a large table where Mitchell had arranged a sand table model of Hill 518 and the surrounding terrain. The atmosphere was tense but professional, men preparing mentally for the difficult task ahead. Gentlemen, Mitchell began, in 4 hours we deploy to Hill 518 with a simple but critical mission. Hold this position for a minimum of 24 hours against an enemy force of regimental strength. He let that sink in before continuing. Make no mistake, this will be a defensive action against superior numbers. But we have advantages: terrain, preparation time, and artillery support. He outlined his plan, pointing to specific features on the sand table. Infantry will establish defensive positions here, here, and here with interlocking fields of fire covering the main approaches. Tanks will operate in hull-down positions on the reverse slope, ready to move to firing positions as needed. Captain Reynolds, commanding Alpha Company of the infantry contingent, raised a hand. Sir, what about anti-tank support? My men have bazookas, but against IS-2s? Good question, Mitchell acknowledged. We'll have 2 M20 recoilless rifles attached to your company, positioned to cover the eastern approach where we expect their heavy armor to concentrate. Additionally, artillery has pre-registered fire missions on all likely enemy assembly areas. He looked around the group. This is critical, gentlemen. We're not trying to annihilate the enemy force. We're delaying them, making them deploy fully against what they'll perceive as a major defensive position. Lieutenant Lawson stepped forward. Our tanks will operate as mobile fire support, not fixed positions. When enemy armor appears, we'll engage selectively, prioritizing targets of opportunity, then relocate before they can bring their superior numbers to bear. Mitchell nodded approvingly at Lawson's contribution. Questions? Major Harris, the artillery liaison officer, spoke up. Sir, what about communications? If the weather closes in as predicted, we'll be firing blind unless we have reliable forward observers. Each infantry company will have a dedicated artillery observer, Mitchell confirmed. Additionally, our tank commanders will report enemy positions for fire correction. We'll maintain redundant radio networks to ensure communication, even if some units are cut off. The questions continued for another 20 minutes as Mitchell addressed concerns about ammunition supply, medical evacuation procedures, and contingency plans if the enemy arrived before they were fully prepared. Throughout, he noted with satisfaction how Lawson and Peterson contributed, demonstrating to the infantry officers that this was truly a combined arms operation led by experienced professionals. As the briefing concluded, Mitchell noticed Colonel Harrison standing at the back of the tent, his expression unreadable. The colonel had remained silent throughout, observing as ordered, but Mitchell knew he was searching for flaws, for evidence to support his view that Mitchell was unfit for command. One last thing, Mitchell addressed the assembled officers. When we reach Hill 518, we'll have precious little time to prepare. Every minute counts. Your men will be tired from the march, but we cannot afford to rest until our positions are secure. Make that clear to them. The first 6 hours will determine whether we hold for 6 hours or 36. He looked around the group. Dismissed. We move out at 1400 hours. As the officers dispersed to prepare their units, Harrison approached. Impressive briefing, Captain. Very thorough. His tone suggested he was surprised by Mitchell's competence. Thank you, sir, Mitchell replied neutrally. Just one observation, Harrison continued. Your defensive perimeter seems rather extended for the number of men available. Standard doctrine would suggest a more concentrated position. Standard doctrine assumes standard conditions, Colonel, Mitchell explained. In this case, we need to control the key approaches while maintaining enough depth to absorb the initial enemy pressure. A tighter perimeter would make us more vulnerable to being surrounded and cut off. Harrison nodded, though his expression remained skeptical. I see. Well, we'll observe how your approach works in practice. He walked away, leaving the implied criticism hanging in the air. Peterson sidled up beside Mitchell. He's still looking to catch you out, Cap. Let him look, Mitchell replied. We've got more important things to worry about. He checked his watch. 2 hours till we move out. Make sure the tanks are fully fueled and loaded. I want extra machine gun ammunition for all vehicles. We're likely to face infantry assault once they realize our tank strength. The journey to Hill 518 took longer than anticipated. Rain began falling as the column moved out, turning the already poor roads into muddy quagmires that slowed their progress. What should have been a 2-hour march stretched to nearly 4, with vehicles occasionally becoming stuck and requiring extraction. Mitchell rode in the lead, Pershing, constantly checking their position against his map. The weather deteriorated steadily, visibility dropping to less than half a mile in the driving rain. It was miserable conditions for the men, especially the infantry slogging through mud, but tactically it offered some advantages. The same weather that would hamper their preparations would also slow the enemy advance and limit their ability to bring air power to bear. They reached the base of Hill 518 as darkness was falling, the rain still coming down in sheets. Mitchell ordered immediate deployment, with infantry companies moving to secure the perimeter while the tanks took up temporary positions to provide coverage during the initial setup. We've lost time, he told Lawson as they surveyed the hill in the gathering gloom. We need to make it up. Get the infantry digging in immediately. I want defensive positions established before midnight. Use the tank crews to help where necessary. Lawson nodded, already mentally adjusting the timetable. What about the artillery, sir? They're still 20 minutes behind us. As soon as they arrive, get them set up on the reverse slope. I want registration rounds fired as soon as possible, weather permitting. If not, we'll have to rely on pre-plotted coordinates. The next 6 hours were a blur of activity as the task force transformed Hill 518 into a fortified position. Despite the darkness and rain, men dug trenches, established bunkers, laid barbed wire, and prepared firing positions. The tanks moved to their designated areas, carefully positioned to maximize their effectiveness while minimizing their exposure. Mitchell was everywhere, checking positions, adjusting placements, ensuring that each element understood its role in the overall defense. He paid particular attention to the anti-tank positions, knowing they would be critical when the enemy armor arrived. Shortly after midnight, the rain finally began to slacken, though the clouds remained low and threatening. Mitchell gathered his key officers in a makeshift command post near the center of their position. "Status reports," he ordered, his voice hoarse from shouting orders over the storm. "Alpha Company dug in on the northern approach," Captain Reynolds reported. "Fields of fire established, interlocking with Bravo's positions. Anti-tank teams positioned as ordered." "Bravo Company, secure on the eastern slope," Lieutenant Parker added. "We've established a fallback position as discussed, with prepared demolitions to slow enemy infantry advance." "Artillery in position," Major Harris confirmed. "We've managed to register on 4 key coordinates despite the weather. The rest will have to be adjusted once we have visual on targets." "Tanks are set in primary positions," Peterson reported. "Ammunition distributed, including the extra machine gun rounds. All vehicles operational." Mitchell nodded, satisfied despite the fatigue evident on every face. "Good work, all of you. Now get some rest. In rotation. Half your men at a time, 2-hour shifts. I want everyone as fresh as possible when the enemy arrives." He turned to Lawson. "Lieutenant, organize a reconnaissance patrol. I need to know what's happening in the valley." Lawson selected a 4-man team from Alpha Company, soldiers with experience in night operations. They departed immediately, moving silently down the eastern slope toward the valley floor. While waiting for their return, Mitchell walked the perimeter one more time, speaking briefly with the men, offering encouragement where needed. He found Colonel Harrison at an observation post on the northern ridge, binoculars trained on the darkness below. "Anything, Colonel?" Mitchell asked, joining him. "Nothing definitive," Harrison replied. "Some vehicle lights about 3 miles north, quickly extinguished. Could be their advance elements." Mitchell nodded. It aligned with his expectation that the North Koreans would approach under cover of darkness to begin probing their defenses at dawn. "Your men worked efficiently," Harrison commented, surprising Mitchell with what sounded like genuine approval. "The positions are well sighted, especially considering the conditions." "They're good soldiers," Mitchell said simply. "They understand what's at stake." Harrison was silent for a moment before asking, "Do you think we can hold this position for the required time?" The question seemed sincere without the usual undertone of criticism. Mitchell considered his answer carefully. "We can hold it. The question is at what cost?" "There's always a cost in war, Captain." "Yes, but a commander's job is to accomplish the mission while minimizing that cost." Mitchell gazed out at the darkened valley. "That's why I disobeyed the order at Hill 468, not from arrogance or disregard for authority, but because I believed we could accomplish an important objective without sacrificing my men needlessly." Harrison seemed about to respond when a soldier approached, his boots squelching in the mud. "Sir, Lieutenant Lawson's patrol is returning. They've got information." Minutes later in the command post, Lawson spread a crude map on the table, drawing as he reported. "Enemy column moving slowly along the main road. We counted at least 15 tanks, mostly T-34s, but at least 3 IS-2s at the rear. Multiple troop carriers and support vehicles." "How far?" Mitchell asked, studying the map. "Approximately 5 miles, moving at about 10 miles per hour in the current conditions. They've got infantry screening their flanks." Lawson indicated the positions. "They'll reach the valley floor below us in roughly 30 minutes. Mitchell calculated quickly. "That puts them in position to begin their assault just before dawn, exactly as expected." He turned to the assembled officers. "Alert your men. Full combat readiness by 0500. Artillery, I want illumination rounds ready on my command. When they begin their approach, we'll light them up and initiate fire before they can deploy fully." As the officers dispersed to their units, Harrison pulled Mitchell aside. "That's not standard procedure. Doctrine calls for holding fire until the enemy is committed to their attack. Standard procedure would give them time to identify our positions before we engage," Mitchell countered. "We're outnumbered and outgunned. Our advantage is in striking first, creating confusion, making them react to us instead of executing their plan." Harrison frowned but didn't argue further. "It's your command, Captain." The remaining hours of darkness passed with agonizing slowness. Men checked and rechecked their weapons, adjusted positions, and prepared for the coming battle. Mitchell moved between the tank positions, ensuring each commander understood the fire plan and their role in it. "Remember," he told them, "mobility is our strength. Fire, relocate, fire again. Don't let them fix your position. And watch for infantry with satchel charges once the fighting gets close." At his command post, Mitchell studied the terrain one more time, mentally rehearsing the battle to come. Lawson joined him, looking remarkably alert despite having been awake for nearly 24 hours. Final checks complete, sir. All units report ready. Mitchell nodded. Good. Now we wait. He offered Lawson a cigarette, which the lieutenant declined. Not a smoker? Wise man. Bad habit to start. My father died of lung cancer, Lawson explained. Smoked 3 packs a day for 30 years. Mitchell lit his own cigarette, the match briefly illuminating their faces in the pre-dawn darkness. I didn't know you well enough to ask before, but what made you choose tanks, Lieutenant? Most West Point graduates prefer infantry or artillery. Lawson seemed surprised by the personal question, but answered readily enough. My grandfather served in the First World War. Tank Corps, one of the first American units to use them in combat. His stories, they made an impression. He must be proud seeing you follow in his footsteps. He died before I graduated, but yes, I think he would be. Lawson hesitated. Actually, sir, he might have appreciated your approach more than mine. He always said that tanks were meant to be used boldly, not by the manual. Mitchell smiled slightly. Smart man, your grandfather. He checked his watch. 0455, almost time. He stubbed out his cigarette and picked up his binoculars. Let's go welcome our visitors. The first hint of dawn revealed the valley below them, shrouded in mist, a ghostly landscape broken by dark shapes moving slowly forward. The North Korean column had reached the valley floor and was beginning to deploy, tanks and infantry spreading out as they prepared for the assault up Hill 518. Mitchell observed them carefully from his position near the crest. They were proceeding methodically, establishing a broad front before beginning their advance. Standard Soviet tactics, emphasizing overwhelming force, applied across a wide area. They're spreading too thin, he murmured to Peterson, who stood beside him, trying to envelop the entire hill. Good for us, Peterson agreed, dilutes their firepower. Mitchell nodded, then keyed his radio. All units, stand by. Artillery, illumination rounds on pre-registered coordinates Alpha through Delta on my mark. He waited until the enemy deployment was nearly complete, tanks positioned in their attack formations, infantry beginning to advance up the lower slopes. Fire! 4 brilliant flares burst high above the valley, bathing the scene in harsh white light that cut through the morning mist. The North Korean forces were suddenly exposed, caught in the open as they deployed. All units, commence firing, Mitchell ordered. Artillery, fire for effect on registered targets. The hill erupted as American guns opened up. Artillery shells rained down on the exposed enemy formations. Tank guns fired from carefully selected positions, and machine guns chattered along the defensive perimeter. The effect was devastating. Several T-34s were hit in the first volley, erupting in flames that added to the illumination. Infantry caught in the open dub for cover, their neat formations disintegrating under the concentrated fire. The North Koreans responded with commendable speed, their training evident despite the surprise. T-34s began returning fire, their 85mm guns seeking out the American positions. Infantry deployed into cover, setting up machine guns and mortars to provide supporting fire. For the next hour, the battle raged across the slopes of Hill 518. The North Koreans pressed their attack with determination, sending infantry up the eastern and western slopes while their tanks provided fire support from the valley floor. The American defenses held firm, the carefully prepared positions allowing maximum firepower to be brought to bear while minimizing exposure. Mitchell coordinated the defense from his command post, constantly adjusting positions and fire priorities based on the developing situation. Lawson served as his eyes and ears, moving between positions to provide first-hand reports when radio communications became confused in the chaos of battle. The first crisis came when a company of North Korean infantry outflanked the western perimeter, threatening to roll up Bravo Company's position from the side. Mitchell immediately dispatched Jenkins' tank to reinforce the sector, its machine guns cutting down the attacking infantry before they could establish a foothold. They're probing, looking for weak points, Mitchell observed to Harrison, who had remained at the command post throughout the fighting. Their main effort will come once they think they've found one. Harrison nodded, his earlier skepticism giving way to professional assessment. Their tanks are staying back, providing fire support rather than assaulting directly. Unusual for Soviet-style tactics. They've learned from previous engagements, Mitchell agreed. They know our tanks are waiting for them to expose themselves on the slopes. He studied the battlefield through his binoculars. There, on the eastern approach, they're massing infantry behind that ridgeline. That's where they'll try to punch through. He radioed the artillery liaison. Major Harris, shift fire to coordinates Echo 5, enemy infantry massing for assault. Then to Peterson, move your tank to support position 3. When their infantry emerges from cover, hit them with everything you've got. The anticipated assault came 20 minutes later, a full company of North Korean infantry surging up the eastern slope, supported by intense covering fire from tanks and mortars. They were met with a wall of artillery, tank fire, and interlocking machine guns that tore through their ranks. Still, their numerical advantage told, and they continued to advance, accepting horrific casualties to close with the American positions. "They're still coming," Lawson reported, his voice tight with tension. "Alpha Company is taking heavy casualties on the right flank." Mitchell made a quick decision. "Pull Alpha back to the secondary line. Have the engineers detonate the prepared charges on the eastern slope." He turned to Harrison. "We're giving ground to gain time, Colonel, shortening our perimeter to maintain defensive integrity." Harrison nodded, understanding the tactical necessity. "A textbook delaying action, Captain, well executed." The battle continued through the morning and into the afternoon, a grinding contest of attrition as the North Koreans threw waves of infantry against the American positions, while their tanks maintained a steady bombardment from the valley. Mitchell's force held firm, giving ground when necessary, but making the enemy pay dearly for every yard. By mid-afternoon, the situation had reached a critical point. The defensive perimeter had contracted significantly, ammunition was running low, and casualties had mounted among the infantry companies. The North Koreans had lost heavily as well, but their superior numbers allowed them to maintain pressure on all sides. "Status report," Mitchell demanded as Lawson returned to the command post, his uniform torn and dirty from moving between positions. "We're down to approximately 65% combat effectiveness," Lawson reported grimly. "Alpha Company is at half strength. Bravo slightly better. We've lost 2 tanks. Wilson's Sherman took a direct hit from an IS-2, and Jenkins's tank lost a track and had to be abandoned. Artillery is down to 20% of starting ammunition." Mitchell checked his watch. They had been fighting for nearly 12 hours, halfway to their minimum objective. "What about the enemy?" "Still probing. They've pulled back their infantry to regroup. Tanks are maintaining fire but not advancing." Lawson wiped sweat and grime from his face. "They're preparing for another major push before dark." Mitchell studied the map, considering options. Their perimeter was now much tighter, concentrated around the summit of Hill 518. It offered better defensive cohesion but less room to maneuver. When the next assault came, it would likely be from multiple directions simultaneously. "We need to thin their ranks before they hit us again," he decided. "Major Harris, do we have enough artillery for one more concentrated fire mission?" The artillery officer calculated quickly. "Yes, sir, if we use everything we have left." "Good. When their infantry begins to form up, I want every available gun firing on these coordinates." Mitchell marked 3 positions on the map. Maximum intensity, minimum duration. We need to break up their assault before it starts. As the officers dispersed to prepare, Colonel Harrison approached Mitchell. His uniform was as dirty and worn as everyone else's, his earlier aloofness replaced by the shared experience of combat. "Your men have fought well, Captain. Whatever happens, they've accomplished their mission." Mitchell appreciated the acknowledgement. "Thank you, sir, but we're not done yet." "No, but you've already held for over 12 hours against a force that should have overrun you in 3. Harrison seemed to be choosing his words carefully. "I may have underestimated the value of experience in certain tactical situations." Coming from Harrison, it was tantamount to a full apology. Mitchell accepted it with a nod. "Different circumstances call for different approaches, Colonel. Doctrine has its place, but it can't account for every situation." "Perhaps we could discuss training revisions when we return," Harrison suggested, "incorporating some of your methods into the standard curriculum." "I'd like that, sir," Mitchell replied, surprised by the offer. "Assuming we make it back." "Oh, I have no doubt about that, Captain. You've demonstrated remarkable resourcefulness so far." Their conversation was interrupted by the radio operator. "Sir, enemy infantry observed forming up on 3 sides, tanks moving to support positions." Mitchell moved to the observation post, raising his binoculars. Sure enough, North Korean forces were massing for what appeared to be an all-out assault. This would be their greatest test yet. "Execute artillery fire mission as planned," he ordered. "All units, prepare for general engagement. This is likely their main effort." The American artillery opened up with a thunderous barrage, concentrating every available gun on the assembling enemy forces. Shells rained down with devastating effect, tearing gaps in the North Korean formations and throwing their preparations into confusion. But the enemy commanders pressed forward despite the losses, sending their infantry charging up the slopes while their tanks provided covering fire. From three sides they came, a determined human wave backed by armor and heavy weapons. "All units, fire at will," Mitchell commanded. "Hold your positions at all costs." The hilltop became an inferno of exploding shells, chattering machine guns, and the screams of wounded men. The American defenders fought with desperate courage, knowing there was nowhere to retreat. Tank commanders fired with precision, selecting targets that would cause maximum disruption to the enemy advance. Mitchell moved between positions, encouraging the men, redirecting fire where needed, embodying the calm leadership that inspires others to exceed their limits. Lawson stayed close, relaying orders and information with efficiency born of their shared experiences. On the western slope, a platoon of North Korean infantry broke through, threatening to overrun a machine gun nest. Mitchell personally led a counterattack, firing his pistol as he directed a squad of infantry to seal the breach. "Sir, you need to fall back," Lawson urged, grabbing Mitchell's arm. "You're too exposed here." A mortar shell exploded nearby, showering them with dirt and debris. Mitchell felt a sharp pain in his side, but ignored it. "Get those men into position," he ordered, pointing to a group of soldiers seeking cover. "Tell them to focus fire on that draw where the enemy is massing." Lawson hesitated, noticing the growing red stain on Mitchell's jacket. "You're hit, sir." "It's nothing. Go." Mitchell pushed him toward the soldiers, then turned his attention back to the battle. The fighting continued with undiminished ferocity as the sun began to set. The North Koreans had gained footholds on all sides of the hill, but the American defense, though bent, had not broken. The cost had been high, with casualties mounting in both infantry companies and another tank lost to enemy fire. In the command post, now relocated to a bunker near the summit, Mitchell received reports from his remaining unit commanders. The situation was grim, but not hopeless. They had held for nearly 18 hours now, 3/4 of their minimum objective. "Enemy pressure is slackening on the northern slope," Captain Reynolds reported, his voice hoarse from shouting orders. "They took heavy casualties in the last push." "Same on the east," Lieutenant Parker added. "Their infantry is exhausted, but they're bringing up fresh tanks. I count at least 5 IS-2s moving into position." Mitchell winced as the medic bandaged his side. The wound wasn't life-threatening, but it was painful and bleeding steadily. "They're going to try a concentrated armor thrust now that our anti-tank capabilities are depleted." Colonel Harrison, who had been studying the map, looked up. "Standard Soviet doctrine. When infantry assault fails, commit armor en masse. And our standard response would be to withdraw to avoid annihilation," Mitchell noted, "which is exactly what they expect." Harrison raised an eyebrow. "You're considering alternatives, I assume?" "Yes, sir." Mitchell moved to the map, ignoring the pain in his side. "They believe they've worn us down, that our anti-tank weapons are depleted and our tanks running low on ammunition." He traced a line on the map. "So they'll bring their IS-2s straight up this draw, the most direct route to our position, where we no longer have adequate anti-tank defenses," Lawson pointed out. "Correct, except for our tanks." Mitchell looked at Peterson. "How much armor-piercing ammunition do we have left?" 15 rounds for my Pershing, maybe 12 for yours," Peterson replied. "Not enough for a sustained engagement against multiple IS-2s. We don't need a sustained engagement. We need a killing zone." Mitchell marked a position on the map. "If we relocate both tanks to this ridge, we'll have perfect firing positions down into the draw. When their heavy tanks enter, we hit them from above where their armor is thinnest." Lawson studied the position. "That's dangerously exposed, sir. Their supporting tanks will have clear shots at our positions once we reveal ourselves." "That's why we don't fire until all their heavy tanks are in the draw," Mitchell explained. "One volley aimed to disable as many as possible. Then we fall back immediately." It was a desperate gambit, but the officers recognized it might be their only chance to blunt the enemy's final assault. With darkness approaching, they had to act quickly. 20 minutes later, Mitchell and Peterson had their tanks in position on the ridge, concealed as best they could manage given the limited time. Lawson had returned to the command post to coordinate the remaining infantry defense. "Remember, wait for my signal," Mitchell reminded Peterson over the radio. "We need all their heavies committed to the draw before we reveal our position." "Understood," Peterson replied, "but if they spot us before then?" Then we improvise, Mitchell finished. As usual, they didn't have to wait long. As the last light faded from the sky, the rumble of heavy tanks echoed up the slopes. Through his night vision scope, Mitchell could see the massive silhouettes of IS-2s beginning their ascent, their long 122mm guns sweeping back and forth as they searched for targets. Steady, Mitchell murmured to his crew. Wait until they're all in the kill zone. One by one, the Soviet heavy tanks entered the draw, moving in column formation up the narrow approach. Mitchell counted them as they appeared. 1, 2, 3, 4. The lead tank was halfway up the draw with the others spaced evenly behind it. Target lead tank, Mitchell ordered his gunner. Peterson, take the rear vehicle. Trap them in the draw. Both American tank commanders waited until the perfect moment, when all 4 IS-2s were committed to the narrow passage with no room to maneuver. Fire, Mitchell commanded. 2 90mm guns roared simultaneously, their muzzle flashes briefly illuminating the ridge. Both shells found their marks with devastating precision. The lead IS-2 erupted in flames as the round penetrated its thinner top armor, while the rearmost tank's track was severed by Peterson's shot, leaving it blocking the exit from the draw. Adjust fire, second tank in line, Mitchell ordered. Peterson, target third vehicle. Again the American tanks fired, and again they hit their targets. The second IS-2 took a round through its turret, ammunition cooking off in a spectacular secondary explosion. The third tank was hit in the engine compartment, immobilizing it instantly. As expected, the North Korean supporting tanks immediately opened fire on the exposed American position, 85mm shells impacting around them with increasing accuracy. Fall back, Mitchell ordered, maximum speed to rally point Charlie. Both Pershings reversed off the ridge, narrowly avoiding the intensifying enemy fire. Mitchell's driver expertly maneuvered their tank down the reverse slope, using the terrain to shield them from direct fire. The gambit had worked. All 4 IS-2s were either destroyed or immobilized in the draw, creating a formidable obstacle for any further armored advance up that route. The cost of 2 tank rounds per vehicle was more than justified by the result. Back at the command post, Mitchell received a hero's welcome from the remaining officers. The destruction of the enemy's heavy tanks had provided a much-needed morale boost for the beleaguered defenders. Outstanding work, Captain, Harrison said, genuine admiration in his voice. That was unorthodox but brilliantly executed. Thank you, sir, Mitchell replied, wincing as he moved. His wound had reopened during the tank action, and fatigue was beginning to take its toll. But we're not done yet. They still have numerical superiority, and they'll try again before dawn. Lawson approached with a radio handset. Sir, message from Division HQ. General Walker says well done. The main force has successfully withdrawn to the new defensive line. Our mission requirement has been met. Mitchell checked his watch. They had held for nearly 20 hours now. Withdrawal authorization? Granted at commander's discretion, Lawson confirmed. They're sending what air support they can muster to cover our retreat once the weather clears. Mitchell considered their options. The task force had been reduced to less than half its original strength. Ammunition was critically low and casualties continued to mount. They had achieved their objective, giving the main force time to establish its new defensive line. We begin withdrawal at 0200 hours, he decided. Phased retreat by units, with tanks providing rear guard. Artillery withdraws first with the wounded, followed by Bravo Company, then Alpha. Tanks come last. Colonel Harrison nodded his approval. A textbook delaying action, Captain. General Walker will be impressed with your entire operation. Let's make sure we complete it successfully before we start celebrating, Mitchell cautioned. We still have several hours to hold, and the enemy won't make it easy. True to Mitchell's prediction, the North Koreans continued to press their attacks throughout the night, though with noticeably less coordination and intensity. The loss of their heavy tanks had clearly disrupted their timetable, forcing them to reconsider their approach. At precisely 0200 hours, the carefully planned withdrawal began. First, the artillery pulled out, taking the most seriously wounded with them. Then Bravo Company disengaged by platoons, maintaining covering fire as they retreated down the southern slope where enemy pressure was lightest. By 0300, Alpha Company had begun its withdrawal, leaving just a screening force with the tanks to maintain the illusion of a fully manned perimeter. Mitchell directed the operation from his tank, despite the medic's insistence that he should go with the wounded. Sir, you really should be on one of the evacuation vehicles, Lawson argued as they coordinated the final phase of the withdrawal. That wound needs proper attention. I'll get it when we're all safely away, Lieutenant, Mitchell replied firmly. Not before. Dawn was breaking as the last elements of the task force disengaged from Hill 518. Mitchell's and Peterson's tanks provided covering fire as the remaining infantry moved down the escape route, maintaining a steady barrage to discourage pursuit. "That's the last of them, sir," Lawson reported as the final squad disappeared into the mist-shrouded valley. "Just us now." Mitchell nodded. "Peterson, begin your withdrawal. We'll follow in 5 minutes." "Not without you, Cap," Peterson objected. "We go together or not at all." Before Mitchell could argue, the radio crackled with an urgent message. "All units, this is Thunderbolt 6. Enemy armor observed moving to cut off southern escape route. Estimated 6 T-34s with infantry support." The North Koreans had anticipated their withdrawal and were moving to trap them. Mitchell studied the map quickly, identifying an alternative route. It was steeper, less suitable for vehicles, but might allow them to bypass the enemy blocking force. "Change of plans," he announced. "We take the eastern ravine. It's too narrow for the T-34s to follow effectively." He keyed his radio. "All remaining units proceed to Rally Point Delta via Route Echo. Avoid contact if possible." The two American tanks began their withdrawal, moving carefully down the eastern slope of Hill 518. Behind them, North Korean infantry were already occupying their abandoned positions, raising their flag over ground that had cost them dearly to capture. The ravine proved as challenging as Mitchell had expected, a narrow defile with steep sides and a rocky bottom that tested the tank's mobility to its limits. They proceeded slowly, alert for ambush from the high ground on either side. Halfway down, disaster struck. Peterson's tank, negotiating a particularly narrow section, slid sideways on the muddy ground and through a track. The massive vehicle ground to a halt, effectively blocking the ravine. "Thunder 2 is immobilized," Peterson reported, his voice tight with frustration. "Tracks separated completely. We can't repair it here." Mitchell assessed the situation rapidly. There was no way to move Peterson's tank, and no way for his own tank to get past it in the narrow confines of the ravine. They were trapped, with enemy forces certainly closing in behind them. "Abandon the tank," he ordered. "Transfer essential equipment and join us. We'll continue on foot from here," Peterson acknowledged grimly. Within minutes, his crew had gathered what supplies they could carry and joined Mitchell's tank. With 11 men now crammed aboard or clinging to the outside, the overloaded Pershing continued down the ravine at a crawl. They had gone less than half a mile when the distinctive crack of a high-velocity gun echoed through the ravine. A shell impacted the rock face above them, showering the tank with debris. "Enemy tank, end of the ravine," the gunner shouted. "T-34, about 800 yards." They were cut off. The North Koreans had anticipated this escape route as well and positioned a blocking force to intercept them. Mitchell made the only decision possible under the circumstances. "Deploy here. We'll fight our way through." He turned to Lawson. "Lieutenant, take 4 men and work your way along that ridge line. See if you can get a clear shot at their flank." "Yes, sir," Lawson replied, selecting men for the dangerous mission. As Lawson's group moved out, Mitchell positioned his tank for a last stand. They had 4 armor-piercing rounds left, enough for one good engagement if they made every shot count. "Target that T-34 at the ravine exit," he ordered his gunner. "Wait for my command." Minutes passed in tense silence. Mitchell knew they were in a desperate position, but he had faced worse odds before and survived. The key was to strike decisively when the opportunity presented itself. That opportunity came when Lawson's group opened fire from the ridgeline, their rifles drawing the attention of the enemy infantry supporting the T-34. In that moment of distraction, Mitchell gave the order. "Fire!" The Pershing's 90mm gun thundered, the shells streaking toward the distant T-34. A direct hit, penetrating the turret and triggering a catastrophic ammunition explosion that tore the enemy tank apart. "Advance," Mitchell ordered immediately. "Full speed through the gap before they can reposition." The driver gunned the engine, sending the heavily laden Pershing surging forward down the ravine. Machine guns blazed at enemy infantry, trying to establish blocking positions, cutting them down before they could bring their anti-tank weapons to bear. Lawson's group provided covering fire from the ridge, their rifles and a captured enemy machine gun sweeping the exit to the ravine. Under this combined firepower, the North Korean blocking force faltered, creating the opening Mitchell needed. The Pershing burst from the ravine onto more open ground, continuing south at maximum speed despite the punishing terrain. Behind them, the sound of combat gradually faded as distance and the broken landscape separated them from their pursuers. 2 hours later, exhausted but triumphant, they reached the new American defensive line. Medical personnel immediately took charge of the wounded, including Mitchell, whose stubborn refusal to acknowledge the seriousness of his injury had nearly cost him his life through blood loss. As he was being loaded into an ambulance, Colonel Harrison approached the stretcher. "The general sends his compliments, Captain. Your task force bought the time we needed. The new defensive line is fully established, artillery registered, air support standing by for when the weather clears." He hesitated, then added, "I've recommended you for the Distinguished Service Cross. The paperwork will be waiting when you return to duty." Mitchell, weak but still alert, managed a smile. "Thank you, Colonel. But make sure Lieutenant Lawson, Sergeant Peterson, and the others get the recognition they deserve as well. This wasn't a one-man show." "Already done," Harrison assured him. "And Captain, I was wrong about experience versus doctrine. They both have their place. Perhaps we can find a better balance going forward." "I'd like that, sir," Mitchell replied sincerely. As the ambulance doors closed and the vehicle began moving toward the field hospital, Mitchell found Lawson sitting beside him, refusing treatment for his own minor wounds until he was sure his commander was safe. "Did we make a difference, sir?" the young lieutenant asked. "All those men we lost?" Mitchell reached out to grip Lawson's arm. "We made a difference, Lieutenant, not just to the tactical situation, but to how the Army thinks about tank warfare. Colonel Harrison will see to that." "And the Dinosaur Battalion? What happens to us now?" Mitchell smiled tiredly. "I think we've earned a new name. The old guard has a better ring to it, don't you think?" Lawson nodded, returning the smile. "It does, sir, and I'd be honored to continue serving with you, if you'll have me." "You've earned your place, Robert," Mitchell replied, using the lieutenant's first name for the first time. "Experience can be taught, after all. It just takes the right teacher and the right student." As the ambulance wound its way toward the field hospital, Mitchell allowed himself to finally rest. The mission was complete, his men as safe as anyone could be in wartime, and the lessons they had learned and taught would endure beyond this battle, beyond even this war. The dinosaurs, it seemed, still had much to contribute to the evolving art of armored warfare. And in Lieutenant Lawson, Mitchell had found someone who would carry those lessons forward into the future, blending the wisdom of experience with the innovations of progress. The war would continue, with more battles to be fought and more challenges to overcome. But for now, Captain James "Iron Jim" Mitchell had accomplished everything asked of him and more. He had proven one final time that when the situation was most desperate, when the odds seemed insurmountable, it was not technology or doctrine that made the difference, but the courage, skill, and determination of the men inside the tanks. That was a lesson worth any sacrifice, a truth that would stand the test of time long after the sounds of battle had faded into history.